So let's get the party started. I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:04. And we have no additions even now. Wow, what are the chances? I don't know what to do with myself now. The clerk's report. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of December 4th.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne, for the second. Any discussion?
Could I add that Herb Pelletier was at that meeting? It wasn't listed in the...
Excellent. Did you get that, Wendy?
I'm sorry, no, I didn't.
Can you add that Herb Pelletier was at the meeting of December 4th?
Oh, okay, so that needs to be added to the...
Right.
Okay, sure, yes, thank you.
The sign-in sheet went missing, so partway through.
Yeah, that was
Have we sent
Sorry?
a sign-in around?
Oh, good point.
I'll find some paper somewhere. John's.
You want a sheet there?
I think Beth said John just went.
Okay.
I have Jody Normando sent along some holiday cheer for the board, so, or anybody, you can have my share
It's to sweeten you up.
to sweeten us up. Oh. Okay, point taken. Be sweeter, Christina. I'll try.
No, you're already sweet, but put up with us tonight.
So, any other further discussion on the minutes? All those in favor of approving the minutes of December 4th, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays or abstentions? The ayes have it, the ayes have it, the minutes have passed. Hello, visitors. Welcome. This beautiful holiday feeling evening. So, as is our custom, and we haven't been down in Guilford in a while, but as our custom, we will take public comment on any agenda item. At the end of the meeting, if anybody in the public wants to comment on something that is not on the agenda, we'll allow time for that. We have had a lot of interest in our meetings and a lot of public input, and so we have been limiting people to try to make the comment in 2 minutes. If you have to go on to 3 minutes, that's allowed, but we're trying to do that throughout all of our meetings to be fair and equitable. That's what Act 46 is all about. So with that in mind, and if I forget, please raise your hand. When you speak, please state your name, address the board chair, and please refrain from making any negative comments to anybody in particular on the board. With that, and I don't know where the bathrooms are around here.
Out the store, down the hallway, on the... on the right.
Excellent, thank you, Lyle. I sent around communications today. Were there any additional communications anybody on the board wanted to share? Yes, Jody.
Recognition of visitors. Had my hand up.
Sorry, I didn't see you, Jody. I gotta put my glasses down for the meeting. You guys are really dark back there. Yes,
What do you do?
Jody Normando.
I just want to comment on I've been watching the videos that I haven't been able to come to, and there's so much noise. And I don't know what's going on in the rooms that have been doing that, but there's so much noise, it's very difficult to hear. And I want to, you're talking about, I'm talking about getting microphones and things like that, but I think for Emily, you need to get her a phone. She comes loud and clear on the phone you had on the other day. So I think that's what you need to do with Emily. But I wish that, this sounds like a quiet room to be in. But,
This is a great room now. This is
yeah, it sounds like it
on the
is.
small side, so that we're battling that. If we were gonna do a big meeting here, it would be the best room.
And I know I did speak to you about not being able to hear Curtis Reed, and particularly because he was up front talking to you guys and not projecting back. And so it's very hard to catch on the video what's going on.
I'm wondering if we could talk about maybe having BCTV provide a microphone up here so the recordings are more clear, so that if you miss something in a meeting, people could go back and hear. Maybe we could, although it's hard with such a big, large board to get that mic'd together. But I am working on the mics otherwise, but Curtis was not feeling well, so he didn't have much of a voice. So that was part of the problem. That's why he was facing us, because he couldn't project very well that evening. So that was part of the evening.
Thanks, that's all right now.
Okay, back to communications. Anybody have any communications to share? Excellent. Moving on to committee reports.
Wait a minute, I have a comment
Sorry.
on communications too. I had to go around and get the communications sent to me because they're not being put on the web. And I understand when it's personnel involved or anything like that, we don't want it. But I just watched part of the Windham Central, and they always start out with passing out communications. Even in writing, they print them out and pass them out. And I would just like to encourage you to at least get them attached to the minutes.
So we talked about that as a board, and given the amount of time spent, time it would take to comb through, and also people may write not expecting to have their minutes public. And so we agreed as a board that if somebody requests them and they've been shared with the full board, then they are a public document and they are available for anybody who requests them. But in terms of posting things, if people are writing things and not expecting them to be posted, perhaps somebody writes something about a principal that maybe they didn't realize was going to be published on a website. I think we really have to think carefully about that. Also, the amount of time that Lyle and I have spent in the past trying to decide what belongs in executive session and what doesn't on communications, it has been a fairly good amount. And so when it's just shared with the board, and thinking about sharing without a full quorum of the board, so it could be requested, but we'd have to really fine-tooth comb every communication to make sure there isn't something in there that might reveal something about a student when it's a parent communication. So,
But we don't even know, what it pertains to. And maybe you could even just say, this is a communication that pertains to, I don't know what, let's say the field or something like that. This communication pertains to that, and you can help filter it out that way. Because we know nothing about what's going on.
I do that now to the board when I summarize them. I say there's a communication from Lyle on diversity, make sure everybody got it. There are 4 communications on the field. There was a communication back and forth about leadership councils. There's one I'm missing, dang it. But anyway, those were the communications that the board had.
For this particular meeting?
For this particular meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. Take it away, Sean, Finance Committee.
All right, the Finance Committee last met on the 4th, and we had a report of that meeting at the WSESD regular meeting, so I don't think there is a report. We will have another meeting on January 8th, I believe. It will be Wednesday, which is first Wednesday in January after the holidays.
Excellent, and I did not, and maybe it was just because it's hard to find, I didn't see the minutes from our meeting posted. So from that Finance Committee meeting posted?
I know you started them.
I started them and then I sent them to Frank, so I don't know, maybe they got lost in the shuffle, but
I don't know that they were posted on the web, but I did see a copy of them from Frank.
Oh, okay.
Right, so-
Now we can check. I know I finished them and thought I forwarded them, so.
I was just looking now to see if I could find them because I was looking for
Okay.
something specific, but anyway.
Yeah,
can just-
I'll make a note, make sure.
Thank you, Frank, I know you got a lot on your plate. Personnel Committee.
Well, we just met this evening, and we went through a number of 1% for the high school, one for the high school, and some for the Brattleboro Town Elementary Schools. There was one in there that also applied to the Guilford, Dummerston, Putney, and also Vernon, and Vernon is going to vote on it at their next meeting, I believe. We did not have time to do our mission statement, so that's something we'll put on our next agenda. Sorry.
Dang, I was so excited. Okay. Thank you, Personnel Committee. Anything else? Policy and Amendment Committee, we met on Monday morning. We have been trying to wrestle down to make sure for the new Brattleboro seats that will be added in this coming town meeting, they'll be voted on this coming town meeting day, and they will take office on the 18th of March. Trying to figure out how those seats get distributed. We all got clear on one of those seats will be a 2-year seat because they have to be evenly, you don't want half of the Brattleboro reps changing at a given time. So David and I spent a long time afterwards making sure we totally understood it. So we are sure that one of the seats has to be a 2-year seat. It's a little, and the committee preferred that for the first year, the second seat would be a 1-year seat because we felt like people are more likely to sign up for the task of being on this board with a 1-year commitment. There's a lot of marriages that don't last 3 years. After the first year, it would then switch to a 3-year seat because that's what our default articles say. The attorney Ottinger thought this would be fine. We've been trying to arrange a conference call with Will Semming to make sure that that is fine, that there's nothing remiss, but we have not been able to raise him on the phone when we've all been available to meet. So I had hoped I could entertain a motion, I'd hoped to entertain a motion right now that would create a 1 and a 2-year seat for Brattleboro, and then they would evolve to 3-year seats afterwards as per the default articles. But I think I need to think about a more clever motion, because in the event the 1-year seat isn't okay, then the policy committee will have to move forward, or actually probably just me, because we don't want to meet on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, and by the time we get to warn it, we'd be into Christmas week. That whatever the Senning approves is what we'll have to put in as a seat. But that was the preference of the committee, to do a 1 and 2-year seat, so that's up for discussion if the full board does not think that that's preferable and they'd like to go for a 2 and a 2 or a 2 and a 3. All those seem to be equally distributed.
I thought that it was going to be a 1 or a 2-year.
One of them has to be a 2-year,
Right.
evolving to a 3-year. And then those 3 seats, there'll be a 1, 2, and they'll all be in good rotation. So you could add a seat. Remember, we did 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 1. So the second seat could be a 1, a 2, or a 3-year as far as equal rotation is concerned. But in case there's some other Byzantine statute that we don't understand, like it has to be a 3-year if you can have a 3-year or something, or if that's Senning's interpretation, then we'd have a 2 and a 3-year for that. No matter what, one has to be a 2-year seat, and that was pretty clear from the first conversation. It's only the second seat that the committee thought would be best a 1-year seat, but we haven't gotten the final blessing from the Secretary of State's office on that as yet.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
There are 4 or 3 new Brattleboro seats?
There are 2 new Brattleboro seats.
Wow, I was way off. Thank you.
But the, one of the, Emily seat is a 1-year, so three will be elected.
Okay, all right.
And if they were all for 3 years, then they would all be elected again in 3 years. And
Okay.
it would be a massive turnover, which is not a good thing.
So 2 new seats are what you're talking about right
Yes.
now? Okay, thank you.
So is it the case that it sounds like it's the case that everything has to be on a 3-year seat eventually?
That is what the default articles say currently. The committee talked about maybe that wasn't desirable, but the statutes maybe look like we don't have a choice. So I've asked that of the attorney as well, but again, we haven't had a chance to talk to him. So, which was not the case in our town boards, but on a unified district, the rules are different about seat allotment. So, any thoughts on that? So I guess I'm looking for a motion to authorize the chair, and I can have someone in consultation because the town clerks really want to move forward with the petition, so people can get out there and publish them, and this is the last thing they're waiting on. So I'm trying to push it forward because the town clerks are pushing us. So, and it's the holidays, so people have to get their petitions in. So I'm looking for a creative motion to authorize myself, anybody on this board, to get advice from the Secretary of State and the attorney and finalize those Brattleboro seats. If it could be somebody from Brattleboro, that might be a good move as well.
I'll move it.
Okay, so the motion, which I gave you a lot of dim sum options there, Todd.
Yeah, but what we're looking for is the sequencing of the Brattleboro additional seats, the 2 additional seats will be coming on. So getting the sequencing for the rest of the board on compliance.
So you're authorizing the board chair and David
And the attorney.
Scholes?
Oh, all right.
Because then there's a Brattleboro person, so
Sure.
that if there's a last minute Brattleboro.
Yep.
You're around the next couple days, David?
Not tomorrow, it's all meetings all day.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
And,
Around the next 2 days.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So you authorize Chris, the chair, and Emily Murphy-Cower to decide on the basis of the guidance from the attorney on the term lengths of the second Brattleboro seat.
You got it.
Did you get that, Wendy?
One moment. So to authorize board chair and
Emily Murphy-Cower.
Emily to decide on the basis of guidance from secretaries.
Attorney and Secretary of State.
Okay. Attorney and Secretary of State on term limits,
On term for the second seat.
term for.
Term length for the second
Term
seat.
length, that's the word. For second seat. I'm gonna read it again just to make sure.
Perfect.
Motion to authorize board chair and Emily Murphy-Cower to decide on the basis of guidance from the attorney and the Secretary of State on term length for the second seat. And so
Oh,
Sean.
Brattleboro.
Of Brattleboro, okay. All right, and Sean made that motion, but I don't remember hearing the second.
We're
Is
waiting
it?
for that.
Second.
Okay.
Any further discussion?
I would just like a point of clarification. I think the town meeting, and maybe Beth knows this, is on March 10th. Is that correct?
It's earlier.
I think it is.
I think it's earlier.
Or if anybody knows when the
It's-
town meeting is.
It's March 3rd,
March 3rd?
yes, first Tuesday in March.
Okay, so that would mean that the petitions will be due back the week.
Well, we have to count six
yeah.
back, so.
I did it from the 10th and I got to January 27th.
Right.
So it would be the previous Monday, or is it the Tuesday? Because we actually meet on a Tuesday, so I'm not sure.
We absolutely have to approve this warning on January 8th. We cannot go any later than that. So everything will have to be decided, and you will have to have that warning in front of you on January 8th to be approved that day.
Which is our next
Which is your
WSESD meeting.
WSU.
So, and then, yeah, and then the petitions will be due very quick.
Soon after.
Soon after that, so.
Should be 2 weeks.
Because the town meeting is March 3rd, then it has to be
6 Mondays.
Mondays prior to that, so, sounds like, yeah.
That's why I'm
Early-
pushing, that's why I'm
early
pushing to get
in
it done
January.
now.
Yeah,
so
gotta
that-
get it done, yeah.
Yeah,
Otherwise, it's not gonna happen.
I'd prefer to bring it in front of the board, but unless you want to be here New Year's Eve,
No, you do.
okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion to authorize the board chair and Emily Murphy-Cower to decide the
On the
term,
basis of guidance.
on the basis of guidance from the Secretary of State's office and the attorney, the term length of the second Brattleboro seat, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions? The ayes appear to have it, the ayes do have it. We were also busy in the committee and made some last-minute changes to the Leadership Council, which I sent around. Barb lickety-split turned those changes around, and I sent those around today, so we can talk about that later in the agenda. And that was all we did in policy and amendment, is that correct?
Hard to believe, but, you know.
Given the length of the meeting. Okay, moving on to Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee.
So we were supposed to meet on Monday, but I had to cancel the meeting. So we have a poll out right now for alternate dates. I'm actually not sure though. I just resent it again like 5 seconds ago because nobody's opened it, it doesn't look like. So and it's my first time using the Google form.
I got it, but I haven't looked
Okay,
at the
cool.
computer all day.
Okay. Then, so it goes. Cool.
Let's skip over climate crisis because Thomas is running a little late tonight and move on to Communications Council.
We haven't met since our last meeting, but we are meeting tomorrow
And
at 12:30.
12:30.
And Diversity and Equity Committee.
Has not met, but I met with the teachers, Diversity and Equity Committee. They're putting together a list of some resources for all the teachers in all of the schools. They're planning Diversity Day, and they made the request that Lyle forwarded it to us. for backing for the teachers, and I guess they decided on the letter.
Mission and Goals Committee, I don't know what that is.
That
Wondering.
just keeps resting there. The mission, that was the first way we described the mission and goals approval
Right.
process.
I
It
gotta,
never was a committee.
read more for comprehension when I approve the final agenda. Sorry about that. And then the WSESU board, the superintendent search committee. Emily, you wanna?
Sure. So we met last Thursday, and where we are at the moment is we're trying to figure out, we're looking for a consultant or a group that could support us in the search process. So at Thursday's meeting, we had talked to 2 different groups, and realized also that there are probably other groups out there, as we hadn't done a really broad enough search. So this Thursday will be, or tomorrow, at 4:30, we'll be hearing from a few more groups. And we've had some communications in the interim about groups such as VSBA. I know Carrie met with NESDEC today.
Oh,
Yeah.
today.
And we've, on Thursday's meeting, we talked to Curtis Reed and Jennifer Andrews? Jacobs, who helped with the town search process. So tomorrow, I think we plan on at least, if not only narrowing it down, but probably moving towards picking somebody at the meeting is the hope.
There's another, did you schedule Mark Andrews yet?
He's tomorrow night.
Mhm.
Tomorrow night?
Yeah.
So he's scheduled in, so
He's
we're
scheduled
gonna,
in.
so we're gonna talk to the
Back to tomorrow
VSBA,
morning.
Sue Siglowski of the VSBA tomorrow night, and Mark Andrews, who's helped some districts, some other districts in Vermont, former superintendent up in was a former superintendent in Essex, and lives somewhere way up there now, so. Excellent. Thanks, Emily. WSESU budget update. We approved the SU budget. It is up considerably, primarily due to increased special ed costs. And that is primarily due to increased students with needs moving into the district. So it's been a busy year in the special education department, finding placements, getting all these new students that have moved in, making sure they have the supports they need. I don't think it was anticipated, judging by the look on Marissa Duncan-Holly's face for the month of September. So I can presume that we were probably spending a little bit in deficit with the special ed funding this year because the students have been here this year and we're carrying on with the plan for them next year. So that has been a challenge at the SU level. It's federally required that we provide the supports we're providing. So we have approved a budget that was, I don't have the number with me, but I do have Frank. I can phone a friend. Can you give me the final numbers on the SU budget that you approved?
Sure, the total was $22,783,474. And in total, it was up 14%. The administrative budget was up 2.4, but as you said, special education was up 20%.
So we'll be seeing that as our SU assessments roll into our budgets. And it was particularly challenging at the SU level this year when you're looking at the allocation because Vernon is a separate district, and so how we managed all that. So I really want to thank Frank for patiently walking through it. So I actually understood how the allocations were happening, and it was a lot of changes from how we've historically done things. So, and special ed would be allocated differently than administration. So there was many formulas working, and they seemed to make sense. So I appreciate all your patience walking me through that, Frank, personally.
Can I also thank Shelley Wilson and Marisa Duncan-Hawley,
Yes.
who have gone through every IEP to ensure that the services that are needed are the services that are being delivered, and basically hours upon hours of going through with a fine-tooth comb, so.
Yes. Thank you for that. Any questions on anything at the SU level? Jody Normando.
I had a question about, and I think I picked this up when you were talking about yeah, what you were just talking about. I'm sorry, my mind's gone. But people had lost their services or lost their out of placement. Was that?
Out-of-district placement?
That's what I was trying to figure out from listening to the conversation that. But they had to be tutored because.
Yeah, you know what she's talking about now.
Yes, I do now. So if they're not on an IEP, but they need, but for some reason we've had to place them in an out-of-district placement, then we may have to be paying for tutoring. Generally, that means that the student is not on an IEP plan, an individual education plan. But we still need to provide tutoring. Students are sometimes placed for mental health reasons, for discipline reasons, a whole host of reasons of why a student might be placed temporarily in an out-of-district placement.
Okay, but the comment was that they lost their placement or whatever, and I didn't know whether.
I don't know.
Things that were treating, organizations that were treating these people would shut down or what the problem was. Okay.
I think I do actually recall. My memory is that the explanation was that at times, children who've been placed in out of system placements were basically asked to leave for some reason, or that was the implication, they had to leave, and that the district is still obligated to educate them. So that I think I asked the question about that particular expense. That essentially we'd have to expend however much money it costs for the tutors to teach those kids when they can't be in those out of system placements. That was my understanding anyway.
That's what I read too, yeah.
Yeah, I had another question too, but it's gone right out of my mind. I may have to wait till the end, but I think it had something to do with people moving in to the area.
We had a lot, yeah.
A lot.
A lot.
Yes.
And now, if they're moving in and they're residents, they're under our budget, but if they're moving in and they come from Dover or Marlboro or somewhere else, they have to pay for that. Okay, thank you.
The increase would just be for the ones that are now residents of somewhere in our district, so. Yes. Liz.
My daughter Lisa works for
Sorry, could you state your name?
Liz Adams from Putney. My daughter works for CIS. And just so you have a heads up, they are so swamped with special needs kids. They're literally going out of their minds. It's coming at you. It's not going to stop. So just to keep that in your head, that.
Thanks for that, Liz.
If you know ahead of time what's coming at you.
Ruby McAdoo from Putney. I feel like I've asked something like this question before, and it's gonna stick in my brain one of these days. But with the SU budget, how does that appear? So from Putney, how does that appear in the Putney budget? Are there line items that directly correlate, or is there some portion of the SU budget are you used allocation as a word? Is some of it allocated to each town? And is it different depending on student count? I mean, how will that come up when we see all of our town budgets?
Up until last year, it was allocated on a rolling basis of your, roughly your enrollment. So per head, it was allocated to the Putney budget, and it was just a line in the Putney budget, SU assessment, or a couple lines, SU assessment for the various, because SU, and while we've been merging, they've been moving more stuff up to the SU level and changing everything on us. So every year you look at a budget, oh, this is up at the SU now. So special ed went up, transportation went up, food services went up. So it used to show up as a line under the Putney assessment. Well, we're all one district now. There is no Putney district per se. So it's the SU assessment now comes to the two districts that are still in existence. Part goes to Vernon and part goes to the WSESD. For things like curriculum instruction and fiscal services, HR, all that is still allocated on a per pupil basis between the two districts, Vernon now and the WSESD. The special education is allocated slightly differently because of Vernon's choice. So it's more based with the special ed allocation on the actual requirements and needs of the students. Did I cover that reasonably well?
Can I ask one follow-up question?
Sure.
You mentioned food services moved over to the SU. Is that what you meant?
The money flows through the SU now.
So I ask this because from a values perspective, our food service at Putney is very important to our community. And so I just want to understand if I should be showing up to the SU meetings as well as the SD.
The Putney situation is a little trickier because some of it shows up on the district level expense, right? Because
Well, it's really no difference in terms of the management and the implementation of budget plans and contracts, employment contracts, and compliance with the child nutrition program. So the service occurs in the schools, so the principals provide a lot of input on quality of program, do we want to run breakfast after the bell, those kinds of programmatic questions. But ultimately, the state, as you said, has assigned the accounting for the food service at the SU level. So at the SU level, they're going to depend on the principal's inputs at the SD level to address any kind of change in operation, a different model. Do we want to replicate the Putney model? That's unlikely to come from the supervisory union board. It's more likely to come from this board. But ultimately, the SU has to manage the financial aspects of the contracts.
all right, moving on. Administrative update.
So just quickly, the majority of everybody's time, building-based administrators, Frank, myself, has been spent on budgeting over the last couple of weeks. We had a school safety meeting. We do this quarterly with first responders. That was supposed to be yesterday. That was postponed. It'll happen in the new year. As Ann just said, schools are working to put together some educational materials around, the board had passed that each school will display it was the Philadelphia Pride flag, but I don't remember what.
The inclusive.
The inclusive Pride flag. So teachers are working, Shannon Kelly at the Green Street Librarian is leading a lot of that work. So that every school will have an educational component with the flag. And I did ask that the board do an informational piece so that we can send that out when the flag is displayed, so that parents understand the reasoning behind that. And the last thing, weeks and weeks ago, when we first started talking about amending the original Articles of Agreement, a strong suggestion was made by Attorney Ottinger that anytime we amend them, we make sure that we note those amendments in the original Articles of Agreement. So that's on my calendar to try to do over the next couple of weeks. So I will be bringing you, I think probably it will just be an approval that, but I will be trying to go through the original Articles of Agreement that were imposed on us and say this is replaced by what was passed in the ballots. Okay.
Oh, that sounds like a fun way to spend your
Way to
winter
spend.
holiday.
So,
Excellent. Thank you, Lyle. And my apologies to John that we are not getting a tour tonight. The budget looms, the 132 or so page budget looms large. So we're not going to, we'll take a rain check on that tour of the school for next time.
We would love to have you back.
Great, we will be back.
Good.
Moving on to unfinished business, so Thomas was somebody who had actually, one of the people that requested this next item, so I'm just going to table it till he arrives. And I think because those two items go together, and my apologies to those people that are here for this, I'm going to table those until Thomas arrives, because having the conversation without him doesn't seem right, if that's okay with the board. And I'm also going to table the mission statements, because next time we're going to have them all to go. So, on to item D, Leadership Council appointments.
So it says Dummerston staff, but Julianne's working with the staff still to determine who will do that. Dummerston does have an additional parent, Maeve Jenkins, is that
Jenks.
Jenks, okay, thank you. Get that right. Maeve Jenks to be approved. Do you want them all at the same time?
Let's just do it individually,
Okay.
maybe. So I'd entertain a motion to appoint Maeve Jenks to the Dummerston Leadership Council. Thank you, David.
Second.
Thank you, Tim. Any discussion? All those in favor of appointing Maeve Jenks to the Dummerston Leadership Council, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays or abstentions? The ayes appear to have it, the ayes have it. Welcome, Maeve.
Okay, thank you. Academy, I believe just Robin Morgan's the only one so far?
Yep, I talked briefly to Christina tonight. My idea is to send home a letter to parents, a second round, just saying, basically with detach and return to me if you'd like to be part of the leadership council. I think writing the letter was a barrier maybe, so having that might help add some interest. Yeah.
So Robin Morgan.
So I'd entertain a motion to appoint Robin Morgan to the Academy Leadership Council. Ooh, everybody's jumping on that one. Everybody wants to do that one. I'll give that to Ann, and I heard David is the
No,
second.
it's Tim.
Tim is the second. Any discussion? All those in favor of appointing Robin Morgan to the Academy School Leadership Council, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions, the ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Welcome back, Robin.
Oak Grove, Summer Birch is the only one that we've heard from?
Excellent. I would entertain a motion to appoint Summer Birch to the Oak Grove Leadership Council.
So moved.
Thank you, Tim.
Second.
Thank you, David. Any discussion? All those in favor of appointing Summer Birch to the Oak Grove Leadership Council, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it.
And
You
we-
keep up with that, Wendy?
Oh, yeah, don't worry about it.
Good, okay.
I'll stop you if I'm like
Okay.
freaking out.
And we have Brattleboro Union High School, we have Rick Mills, Katie Everest, and Kira King.
That's where I'll need a moment, because I gotta get those names down. So Rick Mills
Rick Mills.
Rick Mills,
and
Katie Everest,
Katie Everest, like Mount Everest.
Mhm.
and Kira King.
Can you spell her first name?
Can you spell Kira's first?
Kiera.
Okay, King is the last name?
Correct.
Okay, and that's to,
Brattleboro Union High School.
thank you.
All those in favor of appointing Rick, that's right, I have a motion, sorry. You were saying the name so often, I thought I'd made the motion. I need a motion to.
I would like to make a motion for Rick Mills, Katie Everest, and Kaya Kay to be the BUHS Leadership Council members.
No, Dummerston. Was
Nope.
it?
I mean, the,
Oh, BUHS. Oh,
yeah, BUHS
You're
Leadership
just from
Council.
Dummerston.
Rick and Katie, yeah,
Yeah.
I can see
Yeah,
where you went
but
wrong
it's
on that.
BUHS.
Yep, good, sorry.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Kelly, for the second. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving Rick Mills, Katie Everest, and Kira King to the BUHS Leadership Council, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions, the ayes appear to have it, the ayes do have it. Excellent.
It's kind of interesting because for the BUHS Leadership Council, the person could be from any town.
Correct.
So
Yes.
that's nice. Rick Mills from Dummerston, Katie's from Brattleboro, and I'm not sure about Kaya, but, yeah, from Brad.
Nice. The next item, meeting microphone update, I did not manage to wrestle that one down this week, so my apologies, I will. My brother's a sound engineer, I'll see him at Christmas Eve, so I'll do that then. So,
Next business of pleasure.
yes. Use what free resources you have in the community. And while we're tabling, I'm tabling the VSBA dues. Vernon met on Monday And there was something of a wrinkle because I did not attend the last VSBA meeting because it was our superintendent search meeting. And at that meeting, this is what I get, and at that meeting, they decided to change their policy from allowing non-dues paying districts to be part of superintendent searches. So they will no longer provide superintendent searches because they're, I think it sounded like they're down a person, that sounded like, because they're down a staff person, they cannot provide them. The timing was, the optics on the timing were not excellent, I think. The Vernon, was the sentiment from the Vernon board. And so they wanted to table while we figured out the direction and not have that stymieing our discussion about who we hire to do probably our most important task before us, which is to hire a new superintendent. So this is forever tabled, I swear. I've never tabled something so much. Any other business before us on unfinished business? So that could bring us to, you're on, Frank.
Okay. So I know you all have the electronic version of the document, but for those of you that would like to take notes and look at the paper version, knowing that it's the first draft of probably several. Thank you. It's okay. I did make some copies, but I hope that we use the web version, when we can, because obviously it's a lot of resources to reproduce.
Just as while they're passing them out, is it last year when we got to the end of the process and we put all the budgets together, you had one that was printed in newsprint? And remember the last of the budgets was done in newsprint?
Oh, yes, the annual report.
If we're gonna have drafts of, hundreds of pages, is it possible to do them in newsprint as well, or does that have to go to
That goes out. to
Yeah, so you can't just do it for
Right.
the next week, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
But we will post this draft to the website after this meeting. So I'll give you an overview, and I'm glad to see we have our principals here, Lyle, of course, to provide a lot more background on our programs and our proposals. But if I could also pass around a summary document.
Frank, did you say it was on the website?
It will be tomorrow, yeah. So, we have that single page summary document. So just some of the highlights of the financial metrics in this proposal. And when you flip to the last page of the full document, $52,100,000 is the proposal, up $1.8 million, or 3.6%. I've organized in that single sheet that I just handed out, sort of the primary changes, the largest changes that account for almost all of that increase. And as you know, with budgets, there's pluses and minuses, so it's not like, that's a straight analysis. But there you have the four most significant increases listed there. Change in health insurance, VHI gave us 13%, approximately 13% rate increase effective in July. We have, we're primarily people business, people or organization. So when we add in our assumption for salary changes and all full employment based on the proposed budgets, That attributes $525,000 as a change between the current budget and the proposed. That $525,000 includes for a net of 4 new positions, 4.6 new positions. And then we talked about earlier that significant increase in special education assessment is in this budget. And then last year the high school went to Provision 2 for the child nutrition program. We talked about that also at the supervisory union and maybe a little bit at this meeting, but we knew that there would be a significant increase in essentially making up for the paid meals that occur if you're not in a Provision 2 program. The high school doesn't qualify for the community eligibility program that Brattleboro Town schools have qualified for based on a poverty measure. And that's why when Brattleboro Town went to the community eligibility provision, there was really no significant increase in cost because the federal subsidy paid for those paid meals. But none of our other school sites qualify for that status, and therefore when we go to Provision 2, which is this food at no charge to the student, there is a cost. So as I mentioned, 1.8 million in total in this early draft, and of that you can see 1.759 are attributed to those four items. A couple of other just general references, because salary is such a major component, I've just given you a couple more statistics there. Within this $52,100,000 budget, $23,509,000 are salary wages, and that represents a 2.3% change from the current budget that we have. As far as the staffing changes, I can give you a quick highlight of that. Usually that's of significant interest because of we're all built around programs and services to students. So as I mentioned, we're currently at 409 employees for the Windham Southeast School District. The proposal is the 413.91. The changes, those are approximately 4 employee changes, and I'm not dealing with all the netting. There's reductions and then there's additions. But at the high school, a half-time foreign language position is proposed for Spanish and French. And a science position, it was shared with the Career Center, is being moved back to full-time, so that's about a 0.7 increase at the high school in science. In Dummerston, guidance position being increased to full-time from 0.8. And also a custodial position, which really is substantially just a wash because it's formally contracted. So you'll see a decrease in contracted service and increase in employment there. In Guilford, proposed increase to a para position at the, I think it was K12, is that right, John?
1-2.
1-2.
Yes.
Mhm. Oh, yes, right. Brattleboro area middle school, basically level employment. Oak Grove, basically level employment. Green Street, a position increase at the para-ed level for basically a full position. And the Career Center, essentially a level budget. It's a number of reassignments in the Career Center, but netting out to basically level. So that's approximately 4 positions. I may have listed a couple of maybe an extra half or one, because I didn't share with you a number of reductions that net, as I say, net to 4.63.
Did you say anything about Academy? Maybe I just missed it.
Academy is basically level funded. Sorry, I didn't say anything about that.
And Putney too.
And Putney, no, Putney, there is an increase, as Ian helped us remember, second grade this year was 28 students, and we are actually hired this year over and above what was budgeted for 2 teachers at the second grade level, and that's being sustained probably until they're 8th graders. Serve here, yeah. So there's the very kind of high-level overview of what's in here. Capital plan, I am anticipating spending a lot more time on the capital plan proposals between now and a few days before your next draft. The core of the capital plan funding is in this proposal, but I have not refined the financing component of it. So for example, in Academy, there is a substantial assumption in FY20, 230,000, that I've dialed back to 100,000, because what is shaping up is a $1.4 million proposal that we will review with you at the next meeting on that addition renovation project that was authorized to be studied. We have the study now. We'll advance that to you. But when we have a large project like that, where the former district and now the current district does not have a reserve to cover that, then we need to look at a longer term financing option. And I included 100,000 in the Academy capital plan for essentially a reserve for a debt payment, on a 20-year bond. But this is all, depending on what the board, decides is viable. So I believe in all the other districts, except the high school, where there's already a significant reserve we talked about, about 1.6 million. I actually don't have a provision in the high school for the general fund to appropriate capital money to add to that reserve, even though there are, significant expenditures planned. They have been for the last 5 years, and we continue. The theory there is, and this applies to all of our schools, is it seems prudent that we use the legacy reserves up, and then we start funding the SD into the future based on these capital plans that are going to start taking more, definition based on our discussion. Another reason for that is if there's a state law that says if you appropriate money and don't use it within 5 years, then the state will reduce your state aid, essentially penalize you. So it's another reason why we should use our reserves, but not obviously go down to zero with no resource for future expenditures. Let's see, I wanted to talk about that. And then the last thing is the Health Commission has recently had an arbitrator's report. I haven't had a chance to sort of interpret that and compare it to our assumptions in this budget. So that's definitely going to be something I'll bring up at the next draft.
There's a chance that will happen halfway through this budget then, in theory.
Well, the last thing I had understood from the fact finders is that both parties agreed that they would lobby the legislature in January to not do that.
Okay.
But until January legislative session, begins, that is the assumption that it would happen in July. They're very problematic for the HRA administrator entities that have to comply with the IRS and the various rules, So I also have another document I wanted to pass out, but it's more to start talking about a report format and a way to organize information that is either of interest to you or not. So it's a summary document. It would be the standard that the high school used for several years, where they went from that 60 or 70 page report in the annual report that was essentially the equivalent of this 100-page report. And the feedback was nobody reads it, they can't follow the detail of it, it's just kind of overwhelming. So many union schools have gone to a summary report. I have that document here, but it's more intended to be a discussion about format as opposed to, what it means in terms of the numbers. And the reason for that is, we came from a FY20 period where there was a lot of uncertainty about, who were we going to be, how was the SU going to interface with the schools, and so my point is that I think we would want to restate some of the FY20 values so that we can compare apples to apples. The biggest changes are the SU assessments are large numbers. They go into a district-wide group now, and before they went to an individual site. So now you have this mismatch of costs in a district-wide cost center in FY21 with no comparison number in FY20. The comparison number is in all throughout the detail of the report. So if it's okay, I'd hand that format document out and we have that discussion, unless you'd rather not have that discussion. Okay.
So just a clarifying question, so this format document, you mean instead of getting this packet?
Both, but typically what union schools do is they put the detail on the website so that anyone that wants to delve into the detail can. But when it comes to publishing an annual report, they typically go with a summary document that helps folks absorb the information a lot easier. It also reduces printing costs, and oftentimes allows programs to be highlighted as opposed to sort of lost in the abyss of a lot of data. So what this 7-page document is, it's still organized by site. So if you look at the very top, right under the header there's a descriptor. This is location. That means site, school site. Program we've talked about. I'm going back to this document that I've shared with you now that just drives the whole format of how data is reported for public schools in Vermont. So it's organized first by site, and then within each site, it's going to identify programs, meaning regular ed or after-school programs, food service, and special education. And then if you have an athletic or non-athletic program, it's going to identify that. So right on the first page, you see I've highlighted the academy, school, and I just mentioned where those bold lines are. Those are the programs that I just mentioned. 11 is regular education, going down a few lines after the first bold is 14 is after school programs. 15, you see a little lower, is a program number, food service. 22 is special education, and 92 is non-athletic co-curricular. So every school is organized that. Now, in addition to school and then program, I've not expressed any sort of detail around grade level because generally, if you're an academy school, it's elementary. So if I added the level, you just have a 15-page report with a bunch of subtotals that don't really mean a whole lot. But at the function level, function is the next sort of sort criteria in the report. Function is what's the purpose of the department? So the 1100 is direct instruction. You can see 2100 is support services for students. So that's typically going to be your nurse and your guidance. 2200 is support service for instruction, which is oftentimes it's primarily the library, but it also includes school improvement. So those conferences and workshops, the 1% money, that kind of thing is in the 2200. 2400 is administration, and at the school level, it used to also have some of the special ed assessment data, and that's why I mean in format, looking at page 1 academy in the 2400, you've got this real mismatch where you got 1.1 million in administrative costs. Well, that used to be at academy assessment for special ed, and now that's not there. I'll show you where that is in a moment. So that's part of what I mean by, if you agree, I would recommend that I restate FY20. Of course, we have to come in with the 50,272,000 that the voters approved, but when we present it, it would be nice to give them apples to apples. Operation and maintenance, 2,600, and then transportation. So you see, each program has those functions. Most of them don't have them to the extent in regular education have. But this format allows you to, at a glance, to take 122 pages and by school site get a sense of what's going toward instruction, what's going toward maybe after-school programs, food service, and so on. And, generally, the feedback that we received at the high school for the union meetings over the years was, it was acknowledging that, boy, that 65-page document just didn't mean anything. Couldn't figure out, what all those numbers were really getting at. Where when we went to this format, the Union High School, so there it was the BUHS High School, the BAMS, the Windham Regional Career Center, going from 65 pages to the same 7-page report. You would see it in your annual reports if you look back at the BUHS annual report for several years. That has been the norm. The other things we can do with this kind of a shorter report is we could add some graphics, simple, pie charts that show proportion going to instruction versus administration or debt or, whatever the board might want to emphasize. So that's a suggestion. And then the last thing Sean?
I think it's a really good idea, but one of the things I was sort of thinking about is the, this first sheet that you handed out that shows the increase in health insurance for the whole district very clearly. And that is not quite as clear in this. I mean, you can't pick it out.
Yeah, so that's a good point. To add, what you're talking about is now the object level. So underneath each one of these, I started there. I started with that report, knowing that that's of a lot of interest. So within academy instruction, how much is spent on salaries, how much on health insurance, how much on services. These are the object codes. And that was a 30-page report.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, well, I can produce it, but that 30 pages is still a lot to absorb, and yet we can do subtables. I can easily get that information into a small chart or even a graph, if folks wanted that. But these are the core investments, by what is most recognized, classroom instruction as opposed to, let's say, maintenance on the plant or, after-school programs. These are widely recognized, programs that people are generally interested in. The last thing I was going to mention is I did get equalized student preliminary data yesterday, started analyzing it. I've shared it with the principals to essentially verify the integrity of the data. So within a day or two, the state usually only gives us a day or two to get back to them if we see some glaring difference between what we know we have in our school and what they've reported. They do give us both average daily membership, which is actual kids counts, and then they give us okay, here's the poverty factor, here's the English language learner factor, here's the high school factor, and they give us that equalized student. So I've already gotten 3 versions of the data, which is typical. And you may remember, we started with like 2,445 kids last year about this time. I don't know if any of you remember, but we ended up at 2,034, I think. And that's unfortunately where the state says, oh, somebody else is claiming that kid, you can't both have that kid, and they make these adjustments. But the good news is it's not down, because obviously a budget going up with enrollment going down is a serious problem. And we're not in that mode, but we are basically flat. The actual ADM numbers on a preliminary basis, we had for the Windham Southeast School District, 2,216 students pre-K through 12, and so 2,216, that compares to 2,219. So we're very stable. And the equalized student number was very similar. It was almost the same number as the prior year. It was slightly up. So too early for me to have had time to do a revenue and a tax impact. I have not seen the base index that is generally proposed by the tax commissioner yet. I don't know if anybody's seen a letter yet.
Yeah.
Have you seen one?
I have.
Okay, but that usually comes out around now, and that number is just as important as the equalized student number. Typically that number, you remember, that's that $10,000 number. That's the all-important number that we take our spending and we divide it by to get our tax rate. And what they typically do is they push that number up by the inflation rate. So last year I think it was about 10,800, and if it goes to 11,000, that essentially reduces our cost per student when it comes to calculating the tax rate. So we need that. I expect to see that number this week, and again, I'll bring that kind of data into the discussion for January 8th on that budget discussion. So I think that's the overview. Did I miss anything with our principals? If program development, okay. So.
I had one clarification. I thought you said that Dummerston, this is nitty gritty, but I thought you said Dummerston was going from a 0.8 to a full-time, but it looked like the dollar projections were going down. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
We expect
Because of the salaries, yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure I
Yeah.
heard that correctly. Is there any immediate board question? I saw Beth. I'll go with Beth in a minute. Yeah.
I have 2. So one is about BUHS, the .7 science position. Was this related? I remember last time we talked about the biomedical engineering would be taught at the Career Center. But I don't remember hearing about another science teacher, so is that connected to it? Or?
No, it's the same thing. We're shifting. So when we launched the biomedical strand several years ago, we used BUHS teachers to do it. Career Center's in the process of they've hired they have a teacher who's going to take over teaching some of those courses. So that portion of the FTE will switch from the Career Center line to the high school line. So, you know, it's really, it's a wash financially, but it's just shifting where the salary figure is coming from for the teacher.
So really, none of the .7 is about this 4.63 net additional employees. It doesn't really.
Oh, it is in there. Yeah, that is part of an increase at the high school. I mean, in that it's, unless you're talking about you've got a layoff of 0.7 in that department.
No, all we're doing is shifting the sheltered sections from
The Career Center.
the Career Center.
Yeah, so what that means, it's an increase at the high school, but a decrease at the Career Center. Yeah, so I think we're saying the same thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is that right, Nancy? Yeah, okay.
And my second question was, this is probably you've talked about it before, but maybe I was a little dense. You said provision 2, and then community eligibility.
Yeah,
So I
community
forget what that
eligibility provision is the full CEP, community eligibility provision of the child nutrition program, all part of the USDA program. So that's the base provision, community eligibility provision, they call it CEP. That's, if you can qualify for that, then community is really, walking away from a tremendous resource for kids and families, if they don't access that program. So we accessed that program, Brattleboro Town, 4 years ago. And it essentially pays 80% of the cost of all meals. And so Brattleboro Town, before the merger, was contributing about a little less than $50,000 a year for their 700 kids to eat, which is amazing. But because the subsidy is so high, and that's based on the high poverty ratios. But at the high school, the concern is that families in Brattleboro Town, which are the majority of families at the high school in terms of population, were accustomed to not filling out the qualifying documentation and Steve can't make people fill those applications out. That's not the way it works. So there was a gradual decline in the subsidy that the high school was getting, and that would we think would have continued. That is what's happened in other communities where the population is just not accustomed to qualifying themselves for these supports. So the Agency of Ed recommended strongly, based on what they had seen around the state, that we consider provision 2, knowing that our costs were going to go up anyways, or another way to say it, we were going to get a lower and lower subsidy. So we did pursue that. The state was relatively new to this fixed price per meal contract, and they overestimated the funding that we would have retained for the a la carte sales, which we thought would have brought that subsidy down a little bit more than where it is at, but that's all part of just learning how to work with the USDA program and the dynamics of students making choices about the meals they access.
So provision 2, which we applied for last year, is only at the high school.
That's right. It's
Okay,
a 4-year program. At the high school.
CEP is only at Brattleboro Town and
That's
covers 80%. So what is the
Oh, it covers 100% of our population. So all kids eat
80%
free.
of the cost?
About 80% of the cost per meal. Yep.
What does provision 2 cover? I guess it would be.
It's the same concept from a student's point of view. There's no charge at the register for any student for the lunch.
And the charge for us, though? Sorry, no,
Yeah.
last question.
Adults, yes. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Adults. What?
No, you finished your questions on.
My question was just, so if the Brattleboro Town's 80%, I don't know where to find in this big document, but what is Provision 2 cover for the high school? Meaning, is it like 50%?
Oh, I see, yeah, good question. It's, you need to go to the SU budget to understand that, but the SU budget is, I think it's about $525,000 for the full BUHS program. And the subsidy that the high school is providing is going, now it's not the high school, it's the SD, is going to be closer to 40% of that cost, and it could be as much as 50%. But I think the feedback has been, what I've heard is very positive in terms of the impact on student, learning and satisfaction with.
Sales are, student use is up significantly from when we started it. Another issue that we had is we would have students who would get into a lot of conflict because they would run up a student debt, and we would carry a debt of hundreds and hundreds of dollars for 4 years. And a student, there's no way a family, who's in poverty can pay that debt. So
Big benefit, yeah, for the students.
The preliminary number that I have here is 10,000, for the homestead yield is 10,883.
That's about the same, so
10,648 is what they're saying last year was, so not
great.
no, not what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
I was hoping for 12. I like the people that understand the education funding formula that found that humorous. Thank you. And then, and the non-homestead property rate's gone up to $1.65, so they're pushing a lot onto that. So.
Yeah. Mm.
Yes, David.
Well, other board members have questions? Because I have 4 or 5, so I don't want to take.
Go for it.
Okay. This is obviously the major highlights is really helpful, and the explanation is even better. Could we get something like this for reductions as well for areas, if there are significant places where we've had reductions? So that
Sure.
Great. So that's one. Second is we had the other night well, I wasn't there, but we approved an SU budget that had a $2 million increase in the special ed budget, and is there revenue or offsetting and reimbursed funds so that our increase on that is only $382,000? Is that?
That is correct, and that's part of what I want to make more apparent in these reports. Okay. So I restate the prior year so that you can easily see that. If I could just take a moment, if we go to this 7-page document and we go to this district-wide group, so it's on page 6, and then it rolls into page 7. Yeah, it starts on, it's the group 3096, and it's called district-wide. On top of page 7, this illustrates your question, David, and it will help us really be much more clear on the impact of this change. But 1, 2, 3, the third line down, there's a direct instruction with 86 and an $86,000 figure, and then the 2,300 is the administrative assessment, and then there's the big number that you're asking about. You see, we didn't organize the FY20 budget around an SD, so it's got no money there. That money is all over the place. And then, but here's the new number, $3,512,000. And what I propose to do for you on the next meeting is move all of the relevant numbers that's comparable to $3,512,000 to that spot, and then it answers those kinds of questions. Yeah.
Good. I thought that somehow you found $2 million to reduce from other programs or something. Good. For the new construction of the academy, my recollection, and again, this has been going on for a couple of years, was that was initially, we needed additional space for small group meetings and counseling, things like that. And then the idea of having pre-K was added. So I think I think we need to kind of get a presentation, sort of soup to nuts, and actually Kelly and John were gonna do that when we were at Academy, but it was a long meeting, so we didn't quite get to that, so.
Yeah.
Rather than just bring us I'd like to hear that part as well as
I was
the
thinking
engineering
that
study.
we should schedule that, we did want to bring that up for the agenda on January 8th, that the Stevens and Associates have prepared a feasibility study. They're happy to present it to the board, and I think it would be very informative. It is the single largest project, aside from field improvements that we've talked about that are, we don't have a definitive timeline on that, but this is the next largest project, and I think it would be great to have it on the agenda for a discussion, get a good sense. It's no longer a pre-K accommodation. It's primarily that modular building that's sort of falling apart. It's properly accommodating the instructional intervention that's happening in there, in the main building, and then also renovating the.
And getting it piecemeal, so that's something else I have to try to remember as opposed to getting a coherent proposal. Thanks. The next one was the use of the legacy reserve. Not having money in the bank always makes me really nervous. How can we use that other than just as revenue in a given year? Are there other ways that we can't put that into capital, we can't use it to pay down debt or anything like that?
So the capital funds are clearly restricted for capital purposes, and those are really, the auditors are at the very tail end of producing those reports, and I'll share those with everyone as soon as I have them. I have the values, though. I know, obviously, we can share those anytime, but the general reserve you're talking about. So I know the Brattleboro Union High School has a general reserve for education, significant, and then the Brattleboro Town had a general reserve. None of the other districts have that. Yeah, we need to talk about that. That one is it's sort of a, whatever the word is, oxymoron or something. It's being called a reserve, but it has no designation. So I don't know what that means.
I don't either. When we tried to figure out how to spend it last year, it got even more complex and confusing. And I know that's when I found out about the 5-year limit, and I was thinking, wow, I don't know about that.
So we probably should have the AOE I can make a proposal on behalf of the board and say, do you have any concerns about us implementing this plan? And then if they say good to go, we know what we're doing. It's very clear with the existing reserves that we have at Brattleboro Town, Legacy, Brattleboro High School, Putney had a reserve, Guilford had a reserve. Very clear that we need to spend those on building projects. We got all kinds of building projects that are way more than those reserves. That general reserve, I don't know the answer to that question.
Great. And then the summary report, this is obviously really convenient. We had this conversation last year at town meeting, and the representative town meeting said they wanted to continue to get the phone, but if it's available, that's fine. This is really greatly simplified. The problem with this is we won't be able to get any actuals over previous years, or can you actually
That's a common problem with the first year of operation. The entity didn't exist, so there really is no actual, and then you might say, well, so what? Let's go back into the old systems and sort of approximate. Well, the problem with that is they're in a different code. The state changed the codes, so I wanted to bring that forward, but it's really the best I could do with that is as we close our audits, I will have all those financial statements, and as I have done in many instances, I've gone back to the prior fiscal year actual in a different accounting system, in a different code, and I said, what did we spend in oil in, well, we don't spend money on oil anymore, I guess maybe Dummerston. You know,
Chips.
and is it reasonable in terms of a budget for the future? And I've done a lot of that. I'm sure that's of interest to the board as well. So I can have those statements available that you can go in and you can make those references, but it's, this will be the 1 year that we don't have a prior year actual. Next year we will.
But we have this year. I would suggest that for next year we have this again. Well, we will.
Yeah.
But, so we've got it, we can still look back and
We
compare.
will, yeah.
So that's it for the questions, and I had a couple of additions. One is that the budget so far doesn't seem to reflect any awareness of the concern of the community around the climate crisis. And the Climate Crisis Task Force has been looking at how and where students engage in climate science, as well as advocacy and research skills, and trying to identify those places. And we're doing a pretty good job, particularly in the middle and high school. In the elementary schools, the next gen, I believe it's the Next Generation Science Standards, which is a recent document that provides a really good template for the underlying science that students need to understand climate issues. And it seems that we need to, at least I've come to believe that we need to develop more content at the elementary level that can be integrated into the literacy and math programs, science content. And we found out at our last meeting about inquiry units that are actually ready-to-go units with online support and currently available that we could pretty much immediately, well, not immediately because people have to understand what they're doing and prepare, but that we could pretty quickly integrate into those areas and get some of this basic science learning underway. So I would like to ask the principals to go back to the elementary teachers and working with Paul Smith, who has knowledge about and may have something to say or two, has knowledge about these things, and see if we can integrate a meaningful number of these units and then add that to the budget so that can get underway really quickly, rather than to have to wait a year and come up with a proposal. So typically I want a ready, fire, aim, and another operation, but this really is, it's a crisis. And we've heard a lot about it, and I think having it directly reflected in the budget, I think would be a really good idea. And the other one is the restorative justice people came to our last meeting and talked about the need for a coordinator for those programs for them to be able to grow and have more of an effect. So I'd like to also ask you to look at a way that we can, and obviously, I mean, if not adding staff, changing somebody or changing things around or adding a partial position or something, look at, work with them and see how we can meet that need and get a coordinator in place for next year as well. So those programs can continue to grow. I think that's going to be really important for in the future in terms of improving the climate in the buildings and helping them with a lot of the behavior issues. So those are the two places I'd like to see some additions.
I want to just go back. So the proposed addition to the academy school, that would not include increasing pre-K spots within Brattleboro?
Yeah, initially that was considered, but it's the size of the facility there, the constraints with the playground. There's water on the one side. You know, they've got the Route 9 on a perimeter. So yeah, it was a site constraint. There was some discussion about maybe going to the second story, and that was another high cost issue.
Hold on, Mary, because we haven't discussed this at the Brattleboro town level, so. Go ahead,
I'd love to hear from Mary.
At the Brattleboro town level, I'm looking at adding some more pre-K spots at the Oak Grove site, which would help grow the district level if possible. It would mean some work in a classroom that we'd have to convert to a pre-K approved classroom, but I do have space that I could turn into pre-K to add an additional pre-K.
Do you have an estimate on how many students you might be considering?
We could take 15 per classroom.
And so you'd be looking at 1 or 2?
Currently, Oak Grove has one classroom that is full with 15 students. So I'd be looking to add another pre-K classroom to take another 15, and we do half Head Start and half community.
Question that, are you thinking about another combined early ed and Head Start program and public program?
Ideally, yeah, I think it's been a really great opportunity for our students coming from Head Start to, and I think Deb's here, hi Deb, and we actually met recently about this. This is like really early. I just have had some ideas. I've talked to Lila a little bit about this, and I talked to you, Deb, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So we, very early stages, but I think of the 3 Brattleboro town sites, Oak Grove has the space, and with some adjustments, we could make a classroom work. I'll pass it over to Deb.
So all of that is very true, and our classroom is wonderful, and hopefully we can showcase that. It will be important for us to look at the community needs before we add any more capacity. We don't want to put existing preschool program providers out of business. And so it is a kind of a delicate step, and as Mary said, we're having some preliminary conversations about it, and Janice Stockton was actually involved in that same conversation, and we really want to reach out to the community to make sure that there is a need for expansion rather than putting someone out of business.
Can I say one more thing? So also, because we are a consolidated district, I had some thoughts, and I don't know if this is possible, but I know some of our other towns have very long waiting lists, and some of those families might work in Brattleboro. So if that could be opened up to Brattleboro plus the other town sites plus Head Start, that may be an ideal situation, which would not take spots away from the private pre-Ks that already exist in Brattleboro. I have not talked to the other principals about that, but it's an opportunity. So really thinking creatively there, and hopefully we can all work together, because I know, Guilford, you always have a very long list, right? Yeah. So it's an opportunity, but very early stages, hopefully can do some work on that.
So I just want to say from the equity standpoint, the outlying towns have quite a benefit for families that Brattleboro does not provide right now, and that is that the people who win the pre-K lottery get what is something like an $8,000 or $9,000 benefit for having full-day in-house pre-K, whereas I think there are 8 families in Brattleboro that get that lottery when there's about 100 students per grade in Brattleboro. So I think the board needs to consider so opening it up to more towns, more students in outlying areas when, and I understand your dance, there's a lot of dances we have to consider here, but when we look at programmatic equity, pre-K is a big one, and this is a huge benefit that is, there's 20 spots in Putney, 20 in Guilford, 10 maybe moving up to 15 in Dummerston, and our largest town has 8. Now there's a $3,000 subsidy, but there's a big gap between that $3,100, $3,200 subsidy and something that's about $8,000 in value. So there's other programs Brattleboro does have, and I think we need to look at what the value is for families in the towns, maybe from a maybe there's a math problem to solve this, in that Brattleboro may have other programs that they provide families because they don't have the space for pre-K and because there are existing issues. Or maybe we have to think differently about how we start compensating for pre-K. But this is one that keeps me awake at night as these programs are expanding and the small town people have that advantage which it's a big expense, it's a big line item, so.
You do also have Head Start slots in Brattleboro.
That's true.
That are all free and full day
Right.
and year round. They're not, the classroom that we have at Oak Grove is school year, but the rest of your classrooms in Brattleboro are year round, and that's free for families, so don't forget that.
Oh, I sort of want to take that out of it because those children qualifying for Head Start, those are needs that we really have to invest in, and I appreciate all you do in that area, but when I look at just, regular families that are getting this great benefit, which is, I remember paying those bills, Paul, Julianne, for preschool, and, the $3,000 subsidy has been a really big help to families with young children. It's really good for children, it's really good for the schools. I just want to make sure that we're thinking equitably about it and that the people of Brattleboro are getting an equitable situation all around. So as we think about this dance, there's a piece that I'm looking over at programmatic equity people, thinking there must be a math problem. You guys are mathy-ish people, so.
Maybe one other point about that is looking at enrollment data. We're pretty close to 150 students per grade level in the SD, and then when you think about pre-K, it could be 3 and 4, a combination of. So it's always it's quite variable over time. I've seen the pre-K, but Deb was curious how many Head Start kids in the 3 and 4 year group that you serve?
In Brattleboro?
Yeah.
Because we also serve Westminster.
Yeah.
In Brattleboro, we have 36 Head Start students right now.
Yeah. So, when you think about that in terms of a 150 student class size, and then, in total, when you look at, as you said, the proportion of Putney, Dummerston, Guilford versus 30 plus, 20?
Plus 8 that we have in Oak Grove, so actually we have
Yeah.
42.
Yeah, so there's your proportion, and it's 40 out of 700 versus, as you pointed out, 60 out of 500 or 400. Yeah, that's a pretty significant disparity.
Any other board initial questions, thoughts?
Just had a clarifying question about the capital plan. So I had seen Brattleboro's before in the high schools, but I don't know that I ever saw everybody else's capital plans. So now that we're all together, we're going to be looking at that in early January?
Yeah.
Is that the case? Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure.
The annual meeting, June 25th, we did hand out a capital plan document that had all entities there. The formats were a little different, and now what you'll see is the document format will be the same for all the sites, and that'll be easier to.
So what would be, the capital plan is a projection for the next 10 years of
5
when?
years, yeah.
5 years.
Yeah, with a little bit of history.
Okay.
Generally, it shows major assets that we know have a useful life. It identifies the year that major asset was installed. It projects, like a boiler, if it's 35 years, it has a date that says we need to be planning to replace it on that date. And then in between, could be 20 or 50 years, we're just looking at a 5-year, okay, what should we be, allocating in our general fund to have available in a capital reserve to pay for these projects.
Throw it out to any questions from our esteemed audience.
I just had a
You
follow-up.
just state your name, sorry.
Sorry, Beth Bristol from Guilford. I had a follow-up to the question about the Universal Meals Program. Is the eligibility for that program at the community level? Because I was under the impression that when we unified, that the eligibility would be under the district level.
Yeah, well, that was something that took a while to get clarified, but it is at the school site level. Yeah, so that's why Brattleboro schools retain that that subsidy, and others do not.
Any other? Jody?
Jody Normando, Dummerston. I haven't been doing that. You haven't caught me. There are two other things that you've passed out here. Number one, do you have extra copies, or number two, will they be on the website?
The single sheet is a summary. I do have an extra copy if you'd like. And the other one, I wouldn't recommend. I'll give you both of them, but I wouldn't recommend the other one just because it will be very confusing if you're not in the room or you're not watching the film. But on the other hand, if that's just the nature of budget development, that's okay with me. It's just, as I said, I wanted to get the board's okay to restate the prior year before I did it. And this document, you see these really large areas of disparity because we were a different entity and when we created the FY20 budget. So there's a lot of apples and oranges in there. In total, it's comparable, 50 million versus the 52 million.
I can watch the video and follow it with this. My other question is a question. You said that we had like 409 or 413.91 employees.
Mm-hmm.
Is that everybody? Teachers, administrators, paras, that's the whole bit?
Windham Southeast School District, yeah.
Do you break it down as far as teachers, paras, and administrators?
We can, yeah. I haven't assimilated that data right now, but yeah, we certainly can do that.
And then, have there been any administrators? You've talked about number of teachers. Have there been any admins added to this process since we've merged?
No admins.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That reminds me, I also expect next meeting we'll have a student-teacher ratio analysis to share as well. We tried to get it tonight, and it was too much of a rough draft.
Just got the student number today. That's all
Yeah.
I'm trying.
Thank you.
Yes, Tim.
Tim Maysdale, Brattleboro, been hiding behind the camera here. I have a question I've been wanting to ask the school board for a long time. Vermont, after New Jersey, Washington, D.C., Connecticut, Massachusetts, we ranked number 5 in per pupil expenditures. The 2017 census had us at spending $18,300 per year per student. My question is, how does our district do compared to the statewide average of $18,300? Second, is that a fair metric to use in looking at the how well we're spending our educational dollars? And I'll leave it at that.
I'll take the second question. I have some thoughts about that. When you're comparing schools in Massachusetts to schools in Vermont, I want to somewhat equate it to plowing the road. The per cost per plowing my road in Dummerston per house is very high because you can go a quarter mile before you see the next house, but the road still gets plowed. And it's similar, a lot of the expenses that we have here are because we have rural schools. And so the option might be to put children on a school bus for an hour and a half and have a central large school. I grew up, my town had 6 elementary schools, each operating 3, well, this was back in the baby boomer days, but I mean, there was one principal, there was one superintendent, so those costs are spread out over a larger number because they're concentrated pockets of people. We're a rural community, we don't have those. We also have a lot of challenges with poverty in our area, so I think you have to really compare apples to apples when you're considering what we're subsidizing a food program, things like that. It's, it's important things that we do. It's important work that we're doing, and students need to eat or they can't learn. So there are some challenges that places like the average community in New Jersey probably isn't dealing with. I know there's poverty in New Jersey. I know there's poverty in Massachusetts, but when you look at the poverty level in Vermont versus some of these other states we're compared to, it's quite different. So, how we compare, Frank, how would you?
Well, it'll be interesting to see, now that we've the state is 2/3 gone through this governance reform structure change. So I don't know if there's much data out there yet on that. I'm sure there will be at the end of this budget cycle, because so many entities are either completing their first year or presenting, as we are, our first budget. But the legacy systems before the merge, as you said, when you account for poverty and you account for where we are in the debt cycle, meaning WHS primarily having the largest debt in the state in 2003, when you factor those two elements in, we're very much in the middle. If you just look at cost per student numbers on a list, we're in the upper third of the state, and when you look at a cost per student. But when you factor in, where we are with those issues, and keep in mind, 2024, we will see a $2 million reduction in our debt service. We'll look a lot like the typical district. But that being said, when a bond terminates, we all know it's paying for something that was intended to last 20 years, and you're not going to have to rebuild the foundation, but you are going to have to rebuild the parking lot and the roof and the HVAC systems, and so there will be very large capital costs, but I see a pretty smooth transition through that because boards have been very good about committing to sustaining good learning environments.
Did you want to add to the party, David?
No, you covered it pretty well.
I think also Vermont has some great results too, which is when you compare at a national level, Vermont results for students are quite good overall, and our results in the WSESD are quite good overall. So you're getting good value for your money, and that's also something to consider. We could spend a lot less and not have our students perform as well. So on the measures. Did you want to say something, Paul?
Sure, no, just agreeing with what you said. If you look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP, that our schools are volunteered to do on a yearly basis, they almost consistently for several years, the results have been Massachusetts at sort of at the top, and then a second tier that includes a number of states that you mentioned, Vermont, New Jersey, South Dakota, a couple of others, at that second tier. So if you want to, and it's a caveat, if you want to measure best value for dollar by that measure, which is a measure of mathematics and reading proficiency, then yeah, Vermont scores right up there and comparable to a couple of the states that you mentioned, certainly above Washington, D.C., some others that you also mentioned.
Thank you.
Our area, we provide a lot of social services within our schools, especially the Brattleboro schools, because the community is not able to, whereas if you're in a larger metropolitan area, there are more community service opportunities.
Very true. And
Ruby Matthew Putney. So I appreciate all the work you guys are putting into this in this first time through as a merged district. I feel like I haven't seen the support documents that I hope will be put on the web, but my sense from looking through the SD and the SU budgets is I feel like it's really important that there is consistency across the codes that are used and the ways that we talk about things. And so I'm not going to go into the minutiae of it because I can bother her with all of the Putney related things that I have questions about. But my own particular concerns have to do with aftercare, after bell programming, food services, and summer programming. And I don't see an easy way in the budget to navigate from an equity perspective, which I really appreciate the equity committee applying themselves to this across all of our district. And I think that having that just consistency across our whole district in the way we talk about things, so it's not, is it co-curricular, or is it extracurricular, is it after school, is it after care, like what is it? And so that's just my kind of plea to, over time, try to get to that point where, yes, you always are going to have the 2-pager resource document to help you navigate the 75-pager. But if the 75-pager has consistency that has to do with how people enter stuff into a computer, that'd be great. And I feel like one of the reasons that this is, I feel fairly passionate about this is that as I mentioned before, in Putney, our food service program is really important to our values. And I know from speaking to Steve Head, who's our food service coordinator, and just, understanding it's difficult because it is such a, it's like just this weirdo program compared to all the other ones. When you look at it on paper, it seems like there's a missing piece of what we have income that's different than everyone else's. And it doesn't seem to be reflected to me. And that's my understanding. And I would love it to be reflected so that there's a real, that whole apples to apples thing can happen, if you look just at our food services. So that just is, so it's not really a question, it's just more of a statement of, over time, it'd be wonderful to see an easier way to navigate the numbers on this large budget so that we can think more about equity, not in order to change stuff, in order to understand the value statements of each of our communities so that we can have a better kind of spread of what do we have and what could we do better and how could we improve ourselves.
That particular number is gettable, so I'll walk you through that at some point when you have the 134-page document in front of you and you're comparing food services because it goes up through VSU. So I figured that out the other day. Yeah, I think that's what I will echo what you're saying. I think that we have to figure out some equitable way for that during the day kids get the supports they need and so that they're all moving along in academic excellence. And then I think we're considering, I don't want to call them extras, but after school programs, food programs, and we're looking at those things. We have to figure out a way that those programs reflect community values at the school level, but that the money is somehow equitably distributed with an eye to poverty and special needs and extra needs that may be in some districts. And so how we get to that point, that's a big job. But I think the dollars are somewhat quantifiable and the students that are there are somewhat quantifiable. So I worked on it today, just like a guesstimate of what we might be able to do and just think about, and I don't think it's a case where everybody can have every program everybody currently has because we're at the cap. So I just want to say that at the get-go that would blow us out of the water. And so it may be that different communities in the future have to decide, okay, this program is really important to us and maybe we're not going to grow this other program, whereas a different school may make a different decision. And some of it has to do with, it comes down to money. So some of that's going to have to be how the money gets spent. I think it's doable.
We also want to protect the different schools have different different things going on that reflect their community, for their investments over time or interests over time.
Wow, so can we move along from the first pass through and go back to the tabled items, which I know people are interested in going back to? I'll take that as a yes, hearing a ruffling of papers. Thank you, Frank, and thank you for getting it to us on Saturday.
Okay.
I actually had a chance to go through it. So I had tabled item A and B under unfinished business, just to make sure we had a full board here. There had been some concern and some emails sent to the board that the contract with Gale Associates was perhaps, I don't want to paraphrase too much, was perhaps not the best fit in the minds of the letter writers and people on the board. So there was a discussion about a potential motion to revote that. But I don't know if the contract has been signed at this point.
I've asked Steve to be able to speak to that.
Okay.
So we have signed a contract. We have scheduled a meeting with Gail for January. So we're ready to execute the contract.
I do want to remind you that we are looking at usage, not services, if that makes a difference.
I think surfaces will be reflected in the use, you know, I mean, they're kind of linked.
The proposal specifically addressed artificial turf as well, so that would be part of what they were researching, and that certainly wasn't what we asked for, but that was in the proposal.
What was in that proposal was to take a look at all the real estate that we own, evaluate the use based on things like roster size, facilities available, and what we would see as ideal use, and then to come up with a proposal. And it does not specifically say that we would do turf or natural, it's just their first pass at giving us a visioning tool that we can look at and say, okay, this is what this company thinks we can do. This is, they think that, like for example, this is what they think the feasibility is for putting lights up on Sawyer Field. And that's the scope of what we were asked to provide and get from Gail, and that's what we did. So I guess I would recommend that we've signed a contract, we've set up a meeting. My recommendation would be that we follow through on that process, and then if we don't like that, if we don't like the answer they give us, then we just say thank you, no. And we have a lot of good data.
So, I guess I'm looking to hear if there is a motion to revote that, but the contract's been signed, so I don't quite know where we would stand on that now. I haven't brought my Robert's rules. Hearing no vote.
Are you taking comments at all?
There's no motion on the table, but since it's an agenda item, because we got through that budget by 8 o'clock, I'm in a good mood. So yes, Jody Normando.
Jody Normando from Dummerston. I researched Gale Associates, and I was very, very concerned because everything on their website was artificial turf.
One field.
Yeah, and it was just very, very heavy on artificial turf. And I do have concerns with even asking somebody like this to research it, because you know darn well they're going to come up with artificial turf. And I don't think that's what the community would like. So I just pass that on.
Yes, Liz.
Liz Adams Putney. When I looked on the web, there's quite a number of companies in New England that do this kind of work. And looking at those, there are, they go through, there's a whole span of them. And Gale is at the very top end of, we love artificial turf. And then you've got the other end of, we only do natural turf. So it would have made more sense to me to go with somebody in the middle. And I'm really disappointed that that's who they chose. Because we know the preference of the athletic director is artificial turf.
I went a little step further.
Can you state your
Marilyn
name?
Chiarello,
Thank you,
Brattleboro.
And I contacted Gail and I spoke to John Perry, who's at the head of the Department for Athletic Facilities. And I inquired about the kind, when they do recommend grass or use grass or have an installation of grass, what is the maintenance? And he knew nothing about organics. And I know organics is not very well known, and especially in terms of the benefits and the ability for it to be able to withstand usage, the kind of usage that it would be getting here. But that he wasn't even aware of it and had no knowledge of it really concerned me. I think since the contract is signed and I don't know what's going to happen with that, I really believe it, and I urge you to consider having a consultant who is well-versed in organic management.
To Mayfield Brattleboro, it's important to get our terms right here. Very often the conversation is about synthetic turf versus natural grass. The solutions, in my mind, after all I've researched, is that the solution is organically managed natural grass. There's a big difference there between natural grass. Natural grass is the status quo, and nobody in this room, I think, wants the status quo. We want roots there 4 times longer than just plain natural grass. We have a mountain of compost sitting in Brattleboro that we could use for this, for the health and safety of students, for the environment, for fiscal responsibility. Organically managed natural grass has got to be something that we explore. And Gail is not at all suited to give us any advisement on organically managed natural grass. We know that. And I would think that the high school would appreciate what Gail is not an expert in. They are not an expert in organically managed natural grass. If that's a viable solution, which I think most of the town agrees on, then let's get some experts to give us the feasibility and the costs and what we need for organically managed natural grass. And my colleague here is, I would say, is one of the experts in that, in at least soil management.
Yeah, soil maybe, yeah.
Have you already spoken to this, Jody? So is there anybody else that wants to speak to this? I will give you 1 minute follow-up.
Okay. Quick. You're saying that they're going to meet in January. I mean, I'm concerned about who's going to meet. I would encourage the board, if you go through with this, that you have a group of people meet with the administration and the AD so that you have different opinions looking at Gail or whoever you're looking at.
So with that, I'll move on to point B.
Oh, point B?
Can you ask a quick question first?
Yes, sure.
I'm not sure.
Oh, I hadn't even read that. Okay, sorry about that.
I was never clear on this. The funding for the study, would that come out of the capital reserve fund, or is that from different funds?
Out of the cap.
Is there any way to cancel?
So, one of the other thoughts I had, because our community's interests and what the voters may support may be slightly different than what Gail has experienced in the past, was thinking about, and also to take it a little bit off the board here. Yes, I saw a lot of nodding there, is to create a committee, maybe with some board members, some citizens that have researched this, who, on both sides of the debate, that would work with administration and Gail to hear what's going on and report back to the board. Because I think if we go through this process and questions haven't been answered during the process, we will be back just where we are when that report comes back. And so I don't think the board has the bandwidth with everything we have going on in the next 3 months to take this on. So that was one way I thought maybe, because with the superintendent search, getting public input has been valuable. And I think including the public in the process in some way is is a good thing to do if we want them to embrace the product, the final product.
Yeah, somebody had, I can't remember, somebody had recommended a stakeholder group that we be formed to meet with Gail and the administration to develop that. But I think a question that we need to decide ahead of time is really kind of what Tim and Marilyn just referred to, is what we're saying is, are we saying we want organically managed natural turf solutions to our athletic field needs? Is that the consensus of the board? Is that what we want? Because we can say that to Gail and say, you know, you may not be good at this, maybe you don't want to go through with this, but that's what we're looking for. And here's a stakeholder group that's going to work with you. But we need to decide, is that what we want? We never were really explicit. We talked about wanting a natural solution, and then we made the motion went through. And that's kind of what we expected, and then the information about Gail's expertise. I mean, I don't look, you know, go and research and see what, you know, every recommendation comes to the administration. I pretty much take it at face value, but there was quite a bit of concern about this one. So I think we need to just clarify, do we want naturally managed, organically managed natural turf solutions to our athletic fields?
Sean?
One of the things that I would be concerned about that is brought up before, the high school career for a high school athlete seems like a long time. It's only 4 years. So one of the questions that I've raised before is if we went with a organically, you know, the bed of organic grass on an average field, how long, what is the time span between being able to play on it, the way we did this fall, and when would it be ready to play again? And if you're talking 18 months, 24 months, that would mean that there'd be a large block of athletes that wouldn't be able to play at the high school. So that is a considerable concern to me, and I don't really have the answer on the timeline. So it's one thing that is always, I brought it up before, you can't all of a sudden just have no playing facility due to the fact that a high school career is 4 years long. So anyway, that's
Well,
what
in a similar thing, developing child's body, 4 years is a very big time, so something that can affect their health and possibly injuries is also multiplied. So if we're dealing with possibly less time on an athletic field, you know, that's a negative, but increased exposure to chemicals, more possibility of serious injury, that's also multiplied. So.
Yes, David?
Yeah, it's always dangerous to assume things, but I assume that Sean's question would be answered. You know, what is it going to take what would it take to do this? What compromises, what advantages, what are we going to have to do? Are we going to have to find alternative fields while, you know, if it takes as long as Sean said? We don't know the answers to that question, so doing or not doing something based on what we don't know is probably not advisable.
Yes, Sean?
The reason I asked that question again tonight is I've asked it before, and I've talked with the administration, and it is definitely a consideration. I know that the administration has thought about having availability for the current student athletes is a big consideration.
Emily?
So, I guess in my mind, going forward with this study, if it was organically managed natural turf, would give us another option, because we already have the option of the artificial turf. We already know, essentially, we could have voted to go forward with that instantly. So I would hate to see a situation where we spent all this money and got back an artificial turf option that we already knew about. So I guess to Sean's, or kind of speaking to Sean's concern, we don't know the timelines of the natural turf, but if we don't understand the timelines of the natural turf through this study, then what did we do? We did nothing, right?
Steve wants to.
I don't get too far afield of the agenda item. But I guess, yeah, that's good. Glad somebody got that. But I guess I come back to the idea of what the original impetus of this was. And it was to look at how we're using our fields. How is soccer using our field? How is baseball using our field? And in my mind, the thing that's important is to look at that usage and look at the dynamic. So as we're looking at facilities, where are our bathrooms located? Are our bathrooms located where the students, where the programs where the most students have easy access? Or are we asking some of our students that are in well-subscribed programs to walk further? Are we providing, like, one of our Sawyer field has a changing room, the other field doesn't? So as I look at that, it's not, in my mind, this isn't about what's the surface they're playing on. In my mind, this study is about telling us how can we better use the space in the fall and in the spring to maximize for our athletes. Because we know, we've heard ad nauseum about people's opinions on different surfaces. That's fine. That's not what this is about. This is about how do we make sure, and is there a way that we can make sure that we don't have the smallest soccer field in the state? Is there a way we can have a field hockey field that can support a playoff game, regardless of the surface? And what we really need are fresh eyes, and that's what Gail can do, to come in and look at how we're using our real estate and where are we putting our players. And I guess that's, as I go back, I'm a little frustrated because in my mind, when I proposed this field study, it was with that lens, not with a lens of comparing surfaces. And I don't want to, there's time to go down that path again later. But in my mind, the lens we should be looking at is how are we optimizing our use for our athletes for the various programs. That make sense?
With one little caveat though, because if the organically managed field, which is what the Turi study says, if that allows for 2 times the play of typical unnatural grass, let's say, not artificial turf, but then that would affect Gale Associates' results pretty dramatically. And so, because Natowich now is used like not at all practically in the fall. So if we switch to organic, and there's enough data to support, well, wait a minute, you could use it this way, and Gail's familiar with that, I think that would be a real loss of this study, that they're not going to have a fair multiplier factor for field use. So I think,
Or we say, this is what we want you to look at, and we ask them to do it. Right. I mean, we say,
Professional organization.
I mean, they're a company that's working for us in this at this point, so let's ask them to do that. I guess I'm frustrated because I don't, we've taken a vote, we've passed this, we've set up a meeting, we're ready to go. So let's get some data.
I'm going to hear from the board, and then guess what? We're talking about turf. People want to weigh in.
I'm surprised to hear that the bathrooms part. I think that this entire conversation has been about whether the surface is going to be. And I can't find the motion to pull it up, but I'm pretty sure it said exploring how to use our surfaces to meet the identified needs. And the identified needs were longer season, more practice time, better field, all the things that Steve mentioned. It was always about the surfaces. So it doesn't sound like we're talking about the same thing. Every conversation on this topic with this board and with the public has dealt with the surfaces, not those other facilities. Those they are important, and we have to look at those, but it's how are we using these surfaces and how can we use them and get some of the, answer some of the shortcomings that have been identified.
Sean?
Madam Chair, I would like to say that in the discussion, the proximity to bathrooms, changing facilities, bleachers, observation by the public of athletic events at the high school has always been part of the whole picture of what we need at the high school. There's no question that in high school athletics, especially the people, the students that really want to play athletics, is a very important endeavor. My son happened to be one. He played lacrosse, and he played hockey at two varsity sports. And he's commented to me that they didn't do very well at all in lacrosse. They practiced in the gym. The other teams had availability to practice outside on real field. So they were way behind when they came to play lacrosse.
Well, there are four artificial fields, and they do get to play now up at Putney in the early spring.
They didn't have that when
yeah.
my son graduated in 2004.
My son's complaint is always the referees are the reason he doesn't. Emily.
So it does say, I mean, in the phase one, it says exactly what Steve had mentioned. The demand on the athletic fields is number one, because that's what we've been talking about. Evaluate the needs of the general site improvements such as seating, lighting, all those other things. So I mean, it would be comprehensive. I guess the thing is my thought on it is, if we go, I mean, we already have the contract with Gale. So one nice thing though is we can have this citizens group of stakeholders or board members, whoever we want, that can participate, and if they feel that it's not enough of a priority to push the natural grass, because it says natural and synthetic turf on the proposal. Gale does seem like a little odd fit for the natural grass because they don't do that, but they're supposed to do an overall study, so that's where we're at, I guess. I mean, I'd love to move to get a citizens group.
You're allowed to make a motion.
Okay, I think we should move to get a citizens group of stakeholders that join in the process of, I think they have a term here. Oh, join in this, maybe some goal setting with the administration before the startup meeting, and then participate as needed throughout the process.
In the startup meeting too.
At the startup meeting, and then as seems reasonable. I don't know what other meetings will be, but that's long, sorry, Wendy. Maybe you can consolidate it.
Yeah, give me 1 second. Okay, this may make no sense, but let me compare. So you move to form a citizens group of stakeholders to set goal setting with the administration for the startup meeting.
To participate in the startup
Participate in the startup meeting. I think it's nice.
And the process.
It's nice to have a pre-meeting, which I'm sure you're already having.
Where am I putting what you just said in this motion? Participating, it's unclear how I'm supposed to
Okay, so
integrate
maybe
this
they can
language into
participate, participate in pre-meeting to the startup meeting with Gale Associates.
Okay, to form a citizens group of stakeholders to
help to guide the process of the engineering study that will be conducted by Gale Associates. This includes a pre-meeting with administration, a startup meeting.
Way too fast.
Pre-meeting with administration, a startup meeting with Gale Associates, and other meetings as needed. If anybody thinks that's too broad, you can ask me to amend.
I'm sorry, I'm totally lost. To form a
No, you're really close.
Wow, thank you.
Pre-meeting with admin, startup meeting with Gale Associates, and other meetings as needed.
Okay, so now I have a lot of words, and I think maybe some of them don't need to be there. To form a citizens group of stakeholders to help guide the process of the Gale engineering study, including a pre-meeting with the administration, startup meeting with Gale, and other meetings as needed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's not an engineering
It's a
study.
feasibility, yeah.
Feasibility study, yeah.
Okay.
Friendly amendment there, Emily,
Sorry.
even though there's no such thing.
So replace engineering with feasibility?
Yeah.
Field use?
Field use?
It's a field use study.
Field use study.
Okay, so not feasibility, but field use.
Another friendly, a more friendly amendment. Better,
Proposal was for a feasibility study.
Okay, because there's been some changes, I'd like to read it again to make sure I have it correctly. So the motion is to form a citizens group of stakeholders to help guide the process of the Gale field use study, including pre-meeting, is it a pre-meeting or pre-meetings?
A pre-meeting.
A pre-meeting with the administration, a startup meeting with Gale, and other meetings as needed.
Sounds reasonable.
Okay, great.
Is there a second for that motion?
A second.
Thank you, Thomas. Discussion. Sean?
I would be a little concerned about the potential numbers of people that would meet when Steve was trying to meet with a group that he's engaged in. And I was sort of thinking, from my experience as a builder, would I, if I set up an appointment to go meet with somebody, and then all of a sudden there were 30 people there, it would be difficult. The motion doesn't talk about any number. I mean, this is a hot topic. You could have 50 people there. And, I don't think it would be fair to the administration at the high school, and B, I don't think it would be fair to the firm. So that'd be my concern.
Would you like to ask for an amendment with a upper limit of participants in the committee?
No.
A not to exceed number?
Not to exceed number?
No, I don't. I wouldn't. I don't think I'd be capable or qualified at figuring out who's going to be involved, how, maybe Steve does.
Well, Emily, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it says in that, because I don't have the proposal with me, the contract, it says that Gail commits to meeting, to 3 meetings. The final meeting is a meeting with the board to share their findings. The second meeting, the other 2 meetings are with the UHS administration. What I'm concerned about, again, I don't know, the plan was that it would be myself, Chris Sawyer, Robert Clark, a couple of coaches to go in and meet, with Gail. I don't know how they would feel if all of a sudden we said, well, we're going to bring 15 more people. Because the contract, because when we added them presenting to the board, that was an added cost for the contract. But we felt it was important that they present their findings to the board, not us. So there's no perception of subjectivity. So I guess what I would like to do is, and again, this is just thinking out loud, what I'd like to do is have the pre-meeting with stakeholders and take everybody through a process where we say, okay, so what's important to us? What questions do we have? And then we present those questions and then ask Gail, please incorporate these questions into your study. I think that gets voice there, but it also helps us adhere to our contract that we have with Gail. I don't know, that's just kind of blue sky in it.
I appreciate the intent of it. My concern goes with the guidance, and I'm concerned that if this is, the board is supposed to be making some decisions, how any guidance from community members, if they're expecting that they are saying, well, we want you to do this, or we want it, the focus on this, or we want it to go in this direction, that is, my understanding is this is supposed to come through the board, and that's my concern, is that the community members should be presenting to the board, and we should be, so I don't know, I just wanted to, I agree with like having a pre-meeting and that sort of thing, and my concern is just making sure that it's clear who is, who's making whatever decisions, choices, whatever. That's just my concern about that, is just the clarity.
Well, you're directing me to do it.
I'm saying in this motion, I'm just
okay.
concerned about making it clear for the community.
Sure.
Because if part of the community wants one thing, another part wants another, and you do something, and part of the community doesn't agree with that, I think it's going to cause some conflicts. I think just having it clear
Right.
as to the process, that's my concern.
So, yes,
I
David.
don't know if that makes sense.
I think the issue is that after hearing about the actual area of expertise of Gale Associates, a number of board members are uncomfortable that we're going to get what we want from the process. And that's why we're looking at these other structures or other ways to make sure that we do. And I want to sort of go back to the first thing I said here is, if we articulate clearly that what we want from Gale Associates is some help for figuring out how to create organically managed natural turf solutions for our problems. If we just say it that way, then that's what they have to come up with. There's no question about whether they come up with other decisions or not. There can be people involved in any amount of people involved in that process, but if we aren't, I think we haven't been clear all the way along about exactly what we want. And if that's what we want, then we should say, that's what we want. If Gale Associates says, if we present that to them at whatever format, and they say, well, or whatever meeting, and they say, well, we don't really do that, well then, okay, we'll find somebody else. But that's their decision. I think what we have to be clear about is, what do we want? We can say, okay, we'll have 5 people, no more than 5 people go and participate in the process. And if Yale is like that, well, then, that's another issue to solve. But what are those 5 people going to be looking for? Who are they going to represent? What are they going to represent? We haven't expressed our will for what we want out of this process. And so, I go back to that. I think we need to make that decision. Or at least articulate, either that's what we want or that's not what we want.
So I think that's a different motion.
It's not a motion, but it's
Or
just,
a motion that could be made after this motion on the table, which is talking about having maybe a board member and a few citizens, and I don't envision a 15, I don't envision a 10, I don't even envision probably a 7-person committee, but people that have spent some time either on this board or in the community that represent different viewpoints, just to make sure the questions are getting answered. So, but that's the motion on the table. We can talk about that other motion. I'm happy to entertain that once we close this one out. Sean?
One thing that could be possible, that would kind of include what the motion Emily made, would be to have, I think David mentioned it too, to have a meeting of anybody that wanted to come with the administration in the multipurpose room. Just fill that place right up and everybody gets their word. And then from that, Steve and the administration would have a good synthesis of, what the public wanted, all the people that are present, and take it back. And Steve is a very capable administrator, and he can negotiate and take our concerns, the community concerns, to Gale and return and let Steve do what administrators do.
Any other board comment? Wait 1 second, Liz. Any other board weighing in right now? I'll open it to the public, yes.
How about if you make it
Can you
real-
state your name?
Oh,
Sorry.
Liz Adams from Putney. How about if you make it really simple and have Gail limited to looking at the fields and the facilities, but not making any recommendations about a surface. Just take that out of the equation. And, because there's another factor in there, because they really can't recommend a surface without an engineering study, which cannot be done in the winter. That's relying on somebody to tell them, oh, well, this is like this and this is like this, but that's not what we're hiring them for, at least not what I think we're hiring them for. If they're just going to look at what we've got, how could we lay it out differently, in terms of the use it gets, and the facilities, and leave it there. And so that they're not making a recommendation about any surfacing whatsoever. Keep it clean and simple.
So what I'm stuck on personally, and I don't speak for the board here, but my guess is that like a regular surface can take I'll throw out a number, 20 hours of playing time. An organic per week. An organic surface maybe can take 40 hours of playing time, and a synthetic surface can take 100, there aren't that many hours in a week of playing time. And that affects access. And that's a major thing we're trying to answer. And so I think you have to think about the surface when you think about access. I think that they're inextricably linked. I don't see how you, because it's like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It's like a roll of toilet paper, you know? How long does a roll of toilet paper last? And so it depends on how many sheets are on it. So a roll of toilet paper is not a roll of toilet paper in the toilet paper feasibility study. That's what I'm stuck
But the
on.
feasibility, but the study itself is kind of useless without an engineering study.
But I think
Because-
there's some standards for how long you can use something that they could apply here. That's kind of what I think is part of the
Because,
process.
we've heard about Natowich and
Yeah.
it's terrible and, everybody agrees it's terrible. But then again.
Sorry, I taught 7th grade. My analogies always involve like poop or something. So I'm going to go, I think maybe I'll go Tim and then Carrie and then Ruby.
I have a question about the timeline. I watched the videotape of the last meeting, and Chris Sawyer wasn't sure whether the assessment would even begin during the summer when the field is covered with snow, or whether they would have to wait in the spring. If they wait until the spring, we're going to have a new school board here, which is a factor. But so that's one question: is did the administration find out from Gail when the assessment might start and how long it might take? The second, I'm curious about the BUHS administration was approved for up to $28,000. I'm curious about the contract. How much is the town committed to? How much are the 3 meetings costing?
How about while Emily's researching that, we'll go to Carrie and we'll come back to you for a quick answer on that.
Carrie Amadon. I was trying really hard not to have her speak on this, but I have failed now. My opinion is don't constrict a professional organization from what they do best. So I think to go into a contract with you can't do this, you can only do this.
But that's all they do.
It makes me nervous that we're putting constraints on them. I think certainly it behooves you all to make sure that Gail, and I would think Steve has already done this if he hasn't already, that they know the sense of the community. But I think putting handcuffs on them at the beginning is not going to be a good use of our money. Let them do what they do.
Yeah.
But tell them the direction that you're heading in. That's it.
So the cost, includes phase 1 startup and background evaluation is $6,800. Phase 2 master plan and report narrative, which I assume is the report to the school board, $19,400, and the total cost is $26,200.
Could you repeat that, please?
Yep. Startup and background evaluation, or phase 1, is $6,800. Phase 2 master plan and report narrative is $19,400, and the total cost is $26,200.
Wow. Okay.
So, there's a motion on the table.
I've got Ruby.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ruby. Oh, I'm sorry, Ruby. I thought we did everybody in the
That's
last
okay.
one. So sorry.
That's all right. Ruby Mackey from Putney. So I just wanted to give you a thought. It's not even a suggestion, really, but I feel like there's something that may help to serve the spirit of this community work group, but also not be an undue kind of burden on Steve working with Gail. Might be for the work group to select some representatives so that rather than, because it could be 25 people, and that's not going to happen. But if there were elected representatives from amongst that group of 2 or 4 who did participate, that may give more I guess I feel like, having watched this for so many months, it feels like, I don't think it's the intention of the administration, but it feels like there's a disconnect between what the community says they want, or certain factions of the community that they feel like are not being heard or are not coming, when something comes back and there's an expectation that it will deal with this, it actually dealt with that. And I don't think that that's some kind of nefarious plan, but I do think that if there is a community work group, if the participation from that level via some sort of representative style thing, if that could be part of the work with Gail, then there's no longer that question. Because, if there's an organic question that Gail's response is, I don't know, then at least the person who was able to express the question and could come back to you and say, well, this wasn't answered. So that's my first. And then my second statement or thought is that I guess if I were in your shoes and on the board, I would prepare myself for receiving Gail's study results, and be faced with a hole, like they didn't address. This kind of speaks to what David said. Do you want to know this, this thing, and this thing, and they only dealt with two of them? You should be preparing yourself, and I think those in the community who are interested in this should be prepared with suggestions for who to turn to in addition. And I think that there's a cost associated with it, and if you're doing your due diligence, that's what you're going to have to prepare yourself to do. So those are my two thoughts.
And, Mr.
Well,
Perrin.
I've been ruminating on Sean's proposal about the NPR, and, I think and again, I don't know this, but, one thing we would like to do probably is film that and send the film of the meeting to Gail.
Send the film of what?
Send in the work
The
group.
multi-purpose room, he was using it.
Yeah, if we have a form in the multi-purpose room, we take it right through a process, send that to Gail, say, here's some community input about the process.
Why don't you just cancel it?
I know, I would be riveted.
Have you spoken to this, Jody?
Who, me? Never.
You have a minute.
I would just like to see people, very few people, but with different talents, with a natural grass talent, with an engineering talent, with a community talent. I mean, I'd like to see some different people and put a person on there who wants an artificial turf. And I don't know who you'd pick for that, but, have maybe 3 people, 4 people at the most on this committee with different ideas and different knowledge that they could ask Gail the particular questions.
Thank you, Jody. That still begs the question of creating some sort of committee, which was the motion on the table. And we can put the structure around some sort of committee and how they would interact, and representatives that might join Steve at various times. That can be laid in, perhaps on January 8th if this committee is created. Are you ready for the question?
I have a question
Yes.
first. So if we did want to change, because I put in the motion a few items that the committee would be participating in, let's say we thought it was a better idea that one representative win, or, does my motion, kind of make it so we can't do that?
I don't believe so, because I think you can send representatives from a committee that are appointed to do something, just like you appointed me to do something earlier. So
Just
I
want
don't
to
think
make sure I
that
have flexibility. Okay.
I appoint you to cancel the contract.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of the motion do you want to read it again?
Sure.
Sorry, Wendy.
No, you don't have to.
Been a while.
No, this is.
We should do it with every motion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I usually try to restate when I can.
I'll read it as many times as everybody needs me to.
Thank you.
So the motion is to form a citizens group of stakeholders to help guide the process of the Gale field use study, including a pre-meeting with the administration, a startup meeting with Gail, and other meetings as needed. Does that sound right?
All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays?
Nay.
Abstentions? It appears the motion carries. The motion does carry. A committee will be created. I'm going to ask if PPE could put some thought around this, because you guys have been sort of the point person around this in terms of a small number of people and sort of some ideas of people that we might reach out to serve, and if a board member could be a point person and sort of participate and make sure that it is not an undue burden on administration, but just involves the public and find people that I would think could reach out to other people in the public so there can be a conduit from the public to that committee. I think that would be very helpful.
So just let me, so what is the date of the, did you say there was a date? Because we don't have another meeting scheduled, so we'd have
Until
to.
January 8th, yeah.
I believe it's the 16th of January.
So maybe you can come to the meeting of the 8th with some ideas. That would be great. Because you're going to meet now. That's the problem also. You missed your other meetings, so I know your meetings.
We've got
between now and then.
We've got one almost scheduled.
Okay. Moving back. The annual report documents 2. 8, new business. Item B, annual report documents for town reports and district report items for next agenda. Do you have Barb's list by chance? So, Barb prepared a list of the documents. So as we move into our new structure of being a district, the small towns had, the outlying towns had on town meeting day, part of the, first half of the day might be the select board, and the second half of the day would be the town meeting. It all came in one book. You had a nice lunch in the middle. Brattleboro Town had their meeting on a separate day, as did BUHS, and reports were done all differently. So in this first year of transition, Barb created the various documents that existed. Obviously, the budget would not be published in the town meeting report because that would be a really expensive and non-sustainable choice to put the 132-page document into each town's budget book, each town's annual report, sorry. And there are some things that by statute have to be in there. So Barb prepared a list of what has been traditionally in various town reports, and I can whip through them quickly if people are interested. Brattleboro's contained the child find notice, report of school board administrators, faculty and staff, school age enrollment chart, warning articles. Dummerston contained the child find notice, certified staff salaries without employees being named, classified staff salaries without employees being named, staff lists, enrollments, school director's report, report from the Office of the Superintendent of Schools, and the warning articles. Guilford contained the child find notice, report of superintendent, report of the principal, school board report, staff list, director's list, enrollment, and warning articles. And Putney contained the child find notice, principal's report, school board report, superintendent's report, central school staff, grade by grade enrollment, and the warning articles. So one thought was that we would, in this transition year, continue to put in those things that people have traditionally seen. Yes, David?
I think the town meeting, or the town reports have to be ready for the first Tuesday, or the first, for town meeting day.
Yes.
And we are not, so that means early in February, maybe even the end of January. And I don't know that we're gonna have revenue numbers or have any budget or anything like that.
We're not going to put
Ready to
those in
go.
there. We're not going to, oh, sorry, you were in the back. We're not going to put those in there. But the
Not
things
any
like,
information about the budget at all, just these other things.
I don't think we'll be to that point that we'll have it in time for publication.
We scheduled February 5th, knowing that we'll be the most informed by the, agency of ed and legislative updates, which gives us the most, accurate predictions. So, yeah, that's too late for.
So no budget with stuff in those. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry. Okay.
they want stuff by the latest, generally the 21st of January.
Brattleboro's going to the 28th, but that's it.
Yeah.
But, I think the child find notice has to be in there, but, so the report from the superintendent, we talked about a report from principals as well. So town clerks have been asking for this, and what are we gonna provide, and the initial thought from Barb and I was, let's try to give people what they're used to, without the budget, without the meat and potatoes, but at least the bread, and include all that information that people are used to getting. And then that would also include a letter from the school board, which, I could just draft it, and then we could probably do it on the January 8th meeting. Because Barb said she wanted it 12:30, but that's when they wanted it, so.
I'm thinking about what we used to put in, we put in everybody's name and all the staff positions in all the schools and our enrollment over all those years, but that was for the town, for our schools. Would we put in for all 4 towns into everybody's town, or would it still be just the ones that the towns are interested in? I'm curious.
Interesting question. I think it would just be that school centric, because you want to just see what's happening in your particular school. Because I think what's happening, thank you all. I think what's happening at the WSESD is talking about the bigger enrollment picture and all that kind of stuff, but just as a transition year, like, oh, this is what was this is what I'm used to seeing in my town report. But I'm not dying on my sword for any of this, so if somebody has a strong feeling.
It seems like a lot of work. It's kind of counter to getting the people to think about all the students when they just look at their own. But I completely understand what you're saying. So I just don't know what to think about it. It's a lot of work for somebody.
Yeah, and keep in mind, for 50 years or whatever, there's been half of the whole public education in the region is the Brattleboro Union High School. They have the equivalent of a town report, right? It's a comprehensive report that meets all those requirements by law. And traditionally that has not been incorporated into the town report. So, over time, that's the norm across the state, as it has been in our region. And that's a good point, David, about when you try to split apart the union school, it is a lot of work, and it is definitely counter to who we are now. So it's I think from that point of view, not the direction that we want to go over time. But as you said, maybe as this transitional period, it's important that we do try to make the transition easier for folks.
I also wonder if there should be some sort of explanation in the director's report or in the superintendent's report, like that your town clerk didn't mess up and forget to put the school in, because I think a lot of people won't even, won't even understand that it's not going to be in there, and so and it won't be available to direct people to until after that report. Well, maybe it'll be, we won't know where to direct people to. So, any other thoughts? I haven't thought about it from that perspective.
Well, it might be a good time to really plug the annual meeting for the district into all the town's mindset. So if that was really highlighted, because that is the place now that everybody's going to have the most informational and, just climate, of all the schools is going to be at the annual meeting. And that was the desire, I think, in the beginning, is that we're one entity, we're educating all our children from multiple sites.
Anybody else on the board have a thought on this? I will open it up. Nancy.
So, Nancy Wiesen, I'm just the director of the Career Center. Not a voter for this region. But I would think that you would have the superintendent's report and then have a board letter inviting everybody to the annual meeting and explaining that that's where the new decision about school funding will be made, so that people know the route where they should be going, but it's not, and that the explanation come in your other documents, not in each town's report.
Yes, Ruby.
Ruby McAdoo, Putney. So I guess I have always, as a town person, appreciated the types of one-pagers and, you know, condensed information that come from Frank's office. And I wonder if it's feasible to do something like that, which would show, you know, student count per school, but, and maybe like the pie graphs that you're talking about in some other way of like, this is our total, you know, maybe there's no numbers, but if you have numbers by the time of town meeting, this is our total budget and this is what it represents, not by school, but as the district as a whole, this much is administration, this much is whatever, you know, all the different categories. Because in my, and this kind of mirrors what David said, I feel like as someone who's following what you guys do and is committing myself to really understanding, because this is a whole new world, I feel like that needs to be brought into our towns. And in our town meetings, that's the primary way that we can get to, instead of just the 10 interested parties who show up to your board meetings, you can get, you know, 75, 100, 200 people who start to change their thinking from, well, what's the line item and what are we spending and all of that, to what's the impact of all the spending in our district. And if you give a teaser of, you know, just general ideas about what broad brushstrokes in some way that's palatable in 1 or 2 pages, then you can, you know, that's the little carrot that's like, yeah, come to that meeting, come to the meeting in like 3 weeks or whenever it is, because that's when it's going to be voted on. And so I would think that separating out by school is not advisable. But the only other thought I had was, I think it would be really important, even though many leadership councils have not been around for very long, for there to be a report from the leadership councils of at least the towns where they exist, or the schools where they exist, because getting people aware of the leadership councils as a vehicle and a way for us to connect is important. And I thought that when this merger was talked about for many years, I felt like I was preparing myself mentally for, okay, the budget stuff, all the conversations about budget are no longer going to happen in town meeting. And that creates all the space where we as a community can talk about our school's culture. Who are we? What's important to us? And I feel like the vehicle for doing that, although it hasn't been really, you know, manifested, is via the leadership councils. So I think it's important to reflect that in the reports, in my opinion.
So you're signing up to write Putney's...
I'm on the leadership council. We're having a meeting tomorrow. I mean, you know, like, if you have a leadership council, I think it should be something that's encouraged that, hey, by the way, you should be preparing to write a report for the town meeting.
That's a great idea. So people know where to come.
I think I'd like to speak to what Ruby just said. And when the Guilford Leadership Council met, they outlined 7 steps administrative report, faculty update, and this is for town meeting, academics, unified initiative, I'm not sure what that means, but local programming, farm to school, diversity and equity, and teacher, the importance of teachers. So the Leadership Council in the town of Guilford, as John knows, is they're already working on the presentation for a town meeting. So.
The Leadership Council for Guilford, we spoke about it at our first meeting. We've had 2 meetings thus far, and it came up at the first meeting that it would be an opportunity for the Leadership Council to be speaking exactly about those types of issues, about climate, culture, initiatives, even as you were speaking about equity, and in terms of we're not always going to get the same programming, but what we have will reflect our town's values, our school's values. This is a conversation that our Leadership Council was having, and we believe it's really important to have a quarterly meeting, an evening meeting, such as a school board meeting, a time for other people to come in to have that kind of conversation with as much of the wider community as possible, and then second, to be prepared for town meeting, to be able to give a short presentation without any of the meat and potatoes, because that will come later on in March.
So that could be an interesting way to go. Instead of having a school director's report, we could have the superintendent's report, and we could have leadership council reports. And then leadership councils that exist could present at town meeting day, and there's board members on that, so that would be a good time to, show up and explain what's going on from a board perspective, if we want to do that for an update in our communities for a couple minutes, as has been done historically, in terms of the other stuff that goes on, if you're on a leadership council, retirements, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff that, just put it in front of the community at the annual meeting. So I like this. This is a great motion as far as I'm concerned. I don't have to write a school director's report over Christmas.
Yeah, you have to write this one.
I'm not on a leadership council.
Christina?
Yes, John.
In terms of thinking about having something ready for town meeting is one thing, having a presentation. Having something that will go into the town report, I think is a very different beast.
Yeah.
I know that at least our town clerk here in Guilford has asked for any kind of a principal report, et cetera, to be given to him on Friday, the 20th.
Of December?
Of December.
Oh,
Yes.
That's really early.
It is early. So I'm not sure in terms of, perhaps for Guilford, we have another meeting scheduled for early January that our Leadership Council could have a written document for the town report. I just wonder about some of my other sister schools where their Leadership Councils haven't even formed yet, so some of us having Leadership Council reports in our town reports and others of us not. I'm not sure what that would say about us as a school district.
Anybody? Ideas? Well, we know the child fine notice has to go in there. What else has to go in there?
The warning articles.
Those are going to be done in time?
I doubt it.
Blank pages.
I know.
Gotta write notes.
So this is what was in the past.
But is that a requirement, the warning articles?
We wouldn't put it in the town report.
No.
No, it's not.
Because it's not, we're not warning it for that.
That electorate is
Yeah.
not.
So just the child fine notice, I think a letter from the superintendent is a great thing.
Principal's letter.
So that's what,
Principal's letter.
if we go with what David had suggested, that we're one district, I mean, I've asked all the principals to write the letter to be ready.
because the people that are in that building, because we
They're the
don't
ones.
have people moving back and forth.
Correct.
They're primarily interested in the school, in their community.
Mhm.
So if I were just a parent in Dummerston, I really wouldn't be so terribly interested in the fabulous things that John has going on down here in Guilford. And I probably wouldn't even understand some of the, so I don't, it is what people are interested in when they go to town meeting historically, is what's happening in the school in my community. The schools are the bedrock of communities, so I think, especially in the smaller towns, which is maybe some of the disconnect between like, don't put the school stuff in there, well, in some of these smaller towns, the school is an incredibly important part of the culture and the fabric of the community. And so I think it'd be really good to have, that was my parochial small town view, is a more gentle transition to unification over town meeting, which the small towns are very passionate about, would be good. So I think including a principal's note is a good thing to do in my mind, but I could be talked out of it.
I think I agree with that.
I think a superintendent's letter is good. The child find notice we have to have. The warning articles are gone. I think we can maybe dispense with having you generate all the staff lists and enroll in salary lists and stuff. That always a little.
So the principal's letter would be from the elementary school principal in that town, or principals?
Yes.
And then BAMS and BUHS?
So we've never included in town report a principal's letter from BAMS or BUHS. Doesn't mean we can't. For Putney Dummerston, it would just be BUHS. We could put BAMS.
Of course, that's in the
it's-
high school
it's in the-
annual
in-
report, but not in the town
But
report.
it's never been in the town report.
Right.
I think it might be nice.
I think it might be a good idea. If they're writing it anyway, we're not asking them to do anything extra.
Nope,
So
just sending. Career Center. To go in all of them.
How about WSSU?
well, I think that's really important, because I think you lose sight, and I think it's been.
No, I think it's really important.
I think it's been a problem that you lose sight in the communities, because you're really well acquainted, because we're losing people in Dummerston, we lose people after grade 8, and they don't know the fabulous things that are happening in the WRCC. So if you're in that boring 4th hour of the fire truck discussion, people might start, well, whoa, look what they have. So that, I think it's a good opportunity for us. So, not that I find that boring.
There is a very broad reference in the statute, you probably know it, but I'll just read it, it's just a few words. So, obligation of the school board, this is the law that says this is what is duties of a school board, shall prepare and distribute to the electorate not less than 10 days prior to the district's annual meeting. So that's the key difference. So you can do whatever you want for town meeting, but for the March 17 meeting, this is what you got to do.
March 17th? No.
March 17, 2020.
St. Patty's.
A report of the conditions and needs of the school system, including the superintendent's, supervisory, and treasurer's report and the school district annual report of the previous year. And then there's a whole lot of things about reporting your grants and, things that we always do. But my point is that, yeah, you can do whatever you want for town meeting, but there's a law that says what you will do for your own union district meeting on March 17th. So
What time is that meeting on the 17th?
We haven't said it yet.
I think it was set last year in April. It was one of the requirements of the April meeting. So if you go to the minutes of April 2nd, 2019, that's when that meeting was set.
So now the question is, do we do a director's report and include that or not? Anybody?
So we all draft a paragraph and send it to you?
That's a
and you
great
can staple
idea.
them together?
I like that.
My tendency to say yes, in part because we could also maybe sort of preview the idea that this other material will be coming prior to the annual meeting.
Okay.
And maybe it's another way of ginning up interest.
This is new uncommon, I can't think of the right word, it's too late for vocabulary. But, unusual, but for, it's just to write a little bit, just really a short, like a paragraph, reflective, what's it been like, you know, creating a new system while we run it. Lyle might have something. I can't wait to read yours.
I'll write one of those, you read every other line to get the real answer.
Well, I had an assistant superintendent, it's just when the standards and assessment things were happening, and it was the first time I heard this, people say it all the time now, he said, you're gonna be working on, you know, building the airplane while you're flying it.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah,
No,
I didn't do that.
So we've got child find, superintendent letter, principal's letter, including in all the town reports, the WRCC, BUHS, and BAMs where applicable, and a director's report.
And John, would you mind restating when that's due in Guilford? For the town report?
Well, I got my draft done and I will be submitting it to Peter on Friday.
They're not there Friday. They're not there Friday. That's interesting.
Well, yeah.
That's when it's due for the town report, though.
For the town report, yes.
I can't get the board to, Barb had told me that the 30th of January is what the clerks had told her, so maybe they have a little different.
I know that they've been trying to coalesce this in Guilford.
Yeah.
And they've been working really hard on it, hammering on people. So I think John's right. The deadline is fast approaching.
Some things are the same in all towns, and the level of success is variable, I would say, on that, trying to get reports out earlier. Yes, Ruby?
I still would urge you to have a leadership council section, and for the towns, or the schools that don't have one, have stock language that invites people to participate, and how do you get it? Because of the towns that have leadership councils, even a simple like, we've met 2 times, we're excited about the future, this is what we envision, something, I think it'd be helpful, because that's going to be a really important part of, I think, how the community connects with our school district.
I was also thinking about a presentation at town meeting and some of the time slot allotted, and just a welcome and a face-to-face plate. But I will send out a letter to, or maybe Lyle, you can send out a letter to principals and see if leadership councils want to submit something. And that can be, it's a pretty short time frame to do it and get a leadership council to say, I like what you said, because it's a open meeting issue. So we've got the same challenge here. So I'll try and put something together for the board. Thank you all. Policies. We got some policies that are first read. I will whip through them quickly.
Are those available on the website? I didn't see them.
I do not think they got posted. Okay. I'm sorry. I do have some copies. Were they sent out to the full board? Everybody got leadership councils. Oh yeah, they were before, because we haven't made changes on the others, except we did.
Christina, is that something you can give me, because I'll probably need it for
yes.
the meetings.
I'll send you an electronic copy.
Yeah.
Okay. We made no changes. This one's the easy one. I've lost my agenda. We made no changes. Yes, we did. We made a few changes to board relations with school personnel. The previous, I have it in here somewhere.
Good night, Frank.
Thank you, Frank. Anybody want? Oh, here it is. There it is. Right, we made no changes to D10, so we're not reviewing that. We did review it and put it through the review cycle. D4, educator supervision and evaluation probationary teachers. We made one small change that we linked the evaluations of probationary teachers to the master agreement so that we don't have to change the document if the master agreement changes. So that this document would just refer to the master agreement. That seemed to make more sense to us. And there was a little clunky wording, so when you get the, if you look at the copy online, any changes we made just to clarify wording are there's a strike and a bold face to see where we have made the changes. So I will be putting those on the next agenda to adopt, so if you get a chance to review that one. The board relations with school personnel, we made a slight change because we clarified, and David, there it is. The previous language for board relations with school staff, under relations with other school staff, the original wording was individual board members will communicate with staff members on matters of school business only at the direction of the board as a whole. And I realized I had violated that policy when I ran into Marissa Duncan-Hawley in the produce section at the local grocery store and asked her if things were doing a little better and how things were going in her transition in special ed and helping all these students, because I was communicating on a matter of school business with school staff. And that was not the intent, and we looked at the law, so we have clarified those to say individual board members shall not communicate with school staff members on contractual matters or evaluations, which is obvious and what the statute refers to. School board members will respect and communicate the proper chain of command, school principal, superintendent, school board, when discussing matters of school business with staff members. The proper chain of command is if a teacher has an issue, they should bring it to the principal, then the superintendent, and the school board is the last resort to bring your concern. So when we're communicating, that's what we should be communicating. I'm sorry to hear you don't like this, discuss it with your principal, move it on up. And then individual school board members shall not make any commitments to school staff without the authority of the full board. So we think that really clarifies very clearly what the intent is and how the communication should be happening. So it's not okay to say, it would not be okay for me to meet Marissa Duncan-Hawley in Hannaford and say, the board is going to get you 10 new assistants and a massage every day at 10 o'clock to keep you going. That would not be okay. So,
I thought that was supposed to be a secret.
So those are the highlights on those. Happy to take your comments. The committee's hoping not to meet, but if you have comments on that, go for it. The Leadership Council policy, because nothing like starting up something new to figure out how to make it better. We made a bunch of changes on that. I sent that to the full board. It is the part of the reason we did that. There was some when people read through what we'd written, some of the wording was unclear, so we did some clarification of the wording to make sure our intent was clearly nothing like commas in the right places and things like that. We also tried to make it clear how open meeting law could be adhered to with a minimum of burden on councils, because it's the opinion of the Secretary of State's office that leadership councils are subject to open meeting law. So everybody should have a copy of that. I'll make sure those get on the website, so those get up on the website someplace so that we can, members of the public can weigh in as well.
Should we weigh in now if we have a question?
Yes.
So my computer just died, but luckily beforehand I wrote down what I had thought. So under organizational meeting in the fourth paragraph, it says the board, and I didn't know if that was a typo, meaning...
Should be the council, you're right.
Because I was like, I don't know what the board has to do with this.
No, we gotta change it again.
Sorry.
I'll make that change if it's acceptable to the board and the committee, and then have that put up. Okay. You're good. You're a good proofreader. Any other comments? With that, I would entertain a motion under 1 VSA 313A3, the appointment of an employee to move into executive session.
So moved.
Thank you, Anne.
Second.
Thank you, Tim. There will be action. Sorry, BCTV.
We also have to talk about next agenda.
Oh, and next agenda too. Yeah. And public comment on that. So we'll rise to executive session at 9:24. And I would entertain the motion.
I would like to move that this board hire Nancy Weiss as the director of the Windham Regional Career Center as recommended by administration.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion to appoint Nancy Weiss, director of the Windham Regional Career Center, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays or abstentions? The motion appears unanimous, and it is unanimous.
While you're looking at next agendas, I'm going to send around, this is the Early Ed Services Annual Report.
Okay.
Okay.
A little late reading?
And if you don't mind, I'm going to start my drive home.
We totally don't blame you. I'm only going to Putney. I wish I were starting your drive home.
So, any next agenda items? I have reviewing the director's report. I had something earlier, but gosh, I'm looking
Are we
for
on
the...
agenda?
Yeah,
I have Academy Construction.
Academy Construction. Oh, that's the January 8th feasibility study. Is that what that was? That's what I think.
Probably, yeah. With
Yeah,
Stevens
okay.
and
I have a note, but I can't remember what it's for. So the Academy feasibility study.
That's the Academy School, right?
Academy School addition feasibility study. Construction.
You have budget, I assume?
And
I thought we just skip over it. I think I'm done. Are you guys done?
budget related, but not the 2021 budget, is we found out at the SU meeting that we're going to run a deficit this year in the SU, which I think means we are too. And we might want to talk about whether we want to start, or you think about, or start thinking about ways to restrict spending so that that deficit, if we want to try and contain it, a projection of what it looks like it's going to be, and start thinking about what we can get along without.
So ask Frank for a projection of the deficit, and if he's got a plan to, if he has it.
Do we want him to? Do we want a plan for so I'm not sure how it goes. Typically, well, not typically, but when this happens, boards usually say, okay, well, after December or whatever, freeze all spending, don't spend it. That might be a little extreme, but I don't know. Just we should be.
Yeah, emergency purchases, something like that, and, which I think we could. I would want to talk to Frank, but that would not be unheard of.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to turn that into a item. Anything else anybody wants to include at this point?
It's going to be too early to talk about the cap probably at that time, right?
I don't know, because
I think we'll be.
We might be getting close, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if we know the.
I bet by January
yield,
8th.
is that the?
I've got the yield, yes. $10,886 is the yield, so if he knows that, they didn't give a threshold yet. They didn't give a cap.
They didn't give a cap yet.
They changed that though. I mean, the yield. Well, I think.
The yield changes, I know, but their preliminary yield, yeah, we don't know that till
And
May.
do we know, when will we know how much our special ed grant is going to be?
I don't know. It will be a while, I'm sure.
Not in time for budget.
I suspect not. The other thing, though, we will maybe have an update on equalized pupils as well, but that will all be rolled into budget discussion.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Any other public
Budget
comment
without that-
on non-agenda
without that
items?
number, you know,
Woo, we waited it out. With that,
we made it.
anybody, motion to adjourn, anyone?
Madam Chair, there being no further business before the board this year, I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second to you.
Thank you, Thomas. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.